Call to order. Follow through with the agenda.
Senator Cooper,
Here.
Senator French,
Here.
Senator Kolb,
Present.
Senator Cost,
Here.
Representative Crago, Representative Larson,
Here.
Representative Oakley, Representative Provenza,
Here.
Representative Washit,
Here.
Representative Rodriguez Williams, Representative Yin,
Excused.
Representative Zwanitzer,
Here.
Co-Chairman Olson,
Here.
Chairman Nethercott.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Well, members of Joint Judiciary, we have a very busy schedule. We'll kind of try to keep us on track. So far, we're there. We're going to go ahead and start with the State Park Rangers retirement. I know we have Director Darren Westby here joining us. Good to see you this morning, Director.
Good morning, Chairwoman and committee, co-chairman and committee. My name is Darren Westby, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. It's good to see everybody. Thanks again for the invitation for the topic, as well as, not gonna lie, I'm not used to being in front of this committee, so I feel like I'm kind of cheating on my TRWCR committee, but really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion going forward. To my left, you're right, is Mark Kaufman. He's our Chief Ranger for the Wyoming State Parks. And he'll be doing a majority of the discussion today, but I just want to set it up a little bit. When he came on, he started asking about recruitment and retention and how do we keep our law enforcement? How do we try to go out and hustle and find some new strong leaders in the law enforcement world within our system? And we said, well, so far we've been lucky. He goes, well, we're running out of luck. He goes, do you realize you don't have the law enforcement retirement in your system? And I said, you know, I think a couple of years ago we went after it and got it. And he goes, no, you got the disability side of that, not the law enforcement retirement plan. I said, well, why? I don't understand how a peace officer that do what these gentlemen do, and ladies, we have several ladies, rangers as well. How are they not in this retirement plan? And the head scratcher. And so again, I really appreciate the opportunity that you guys presented with putting it on the interim topic and hopefully see some movement in this regard. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Ranger Kaufman. Thank you again.
Hi, good morning. Sorry. Good morning. Thank you for having us again. I'm Mark Kaufman, the Chief Ranger for Wyoming State Parks. I just started this job back in January, but I come with 27 years experience. Manage a very large park district in Colorado and Laramie County. And so I was hired here to kind of oversee the ranger program for the state of Wyoming. And as Director Westby said, part of my job is to hire, retain, recruit the best quality rangers we can for our program. And part of this process, and I think I should probably maybe just a little background here, that just in case you don't know, all of our state rangers are Wyoming post certified. They have the same training, same responsibility as any highway patrol, game warden, or sheriff or police officer in the state of Wyoming. They have the same criteria when we hire them. And they work in the same environments and have the same job responsibilities in law enforcement. It's to really, when we talk about the rangers, we're talking about myself and 4 full-time rangers, then a handful of seasonal rangers that take on these tasks. And our job is we're responsible for the safety of public safety for over 5 million visitors in our parks, historic sites, and trails in the state of Wyoming. As you can imagine, it's a pretty large undertaking for a handful of rangers. And our job is, again, public safety. And we work obviously in outdoor environments and rough environments, often alone. Often we're the only public safety law enforcement in our areas. And also we assist other law enforcement agencies in the state of Wyoming. We respond to hundreds of calls for assistance from other agencies, sheriff's departments, police departments around our park areas to help them out as well. So we fill that role as well as far as the law enforcement need in the state of Wyoming. You know, we have this specialized training as well. Not only do we do law enforcement, we do medical rescues, we do search and rescues. We provide a lot of help to game and fish as far as helping them enforce, fishing and hunting regulations and help them assist in boating safety as well around the state. And also we're boating safety specialists as well. So we help kind of provide that to other folks as well. Big a big part of our job is to hire and retain these people. It's a very responsible job. It's a risky job. You know, we experience the same I guess, injuries and stuff as other law enforcement agencies. We've had officers shot in line of duty. We have officers assaulted and other risks that normal law enforcement officers take. Again, we're obviously in a remote environment with very little to no support or backup, just to the remoteness of our location. You know, some of our, like I said, you know, we had over 5 million visitors in our parks and historic sites and trails last year, and that growth that will continue to grow as population rises, as people want to get outdoors and spend time outdoors. And again, we're responsible for their safety. And you know, even Splendo Reservoir, for example, has about 25,000 people on a weekend day in the summertime. A lot of communities in the state of Wyoming don't have 25,000 people in them, let alone 25,000 people that are actively doing something. So we handle that public safety with very little staff to do that. So we take that responsibility very seriously. Part of my job is to provide the best professional and trained rangers that I can possibly can. And to Director Westby's point is that I have to hire the best qualified people I can. The way I have to do that is to hire the people to give them something to offer they want to come with. As you know, that law enforcement since 2020 has seen in droves of people leaving law enforcement profession to do other things, just because of in light of the things that happen around the country, which makes it incredibly hard for us to retain people in law enforcement, and it's also incredibly hard for us to hire people in law enforcement. So again, it's my job to develop the best people I can, to provide the best level of service I can from the state of Wyoming, and to recruit the best people that I can. And this retirement package, which I was surprised we weren't in, will enable me to help build that better program. So I think that's about all I have.
Madam Chairman, I think Mark said it very well. You know, we're all brand managers. We work for the governor. We work for you. We're the face of 5.8 million people last year. That's a pretty high responsibility, and ensuring that we have the best candidates and the best people, putting that brand out there for you as well as I and the governor is very important to us, and we want to try to ensure that we're staying on that brand. And we sit for any questions.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Director. Questions for the Director, Representative Washut?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully support the idea of getting your rangers in our pension system, but I have a question about the seasonal aspect. Are there other state employees who are seasonal in nature who participate in the state pension plan? I think it's pretty clear the 4 full-time rangers ought to be in this pension plan, but I'm not sure how the seasonal employees would work out. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
You know, my understanding that is that to trip that trigger where a seasonal employee would be eligible for retirement benefits would be working a longer than 6-month time period. And so if we had some employees who were on contract, so to speak, longer than the traditional 6-month time period, then they would be eligible for retirement benefits. And the question is, would this trip the trigger to put them in this program as well? And that's something we have to talk about in this process.
Further questions? Co-Chairman Olson?
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Mr. Hoffman, so down that was the lead in actually to my line of questioning. So I'm just trying to map out different scenarios. There are 4 FTEs.
Yes, plus myself, yes.
And so have we mapped out what the total cost would be for the 5 FTEs? And then if we were contemplating seasonals?
Chairman Olson, we're working with the State Retirement Board. They've been the last couple of weeks. They're working on with their actuaries to figure out what that cost will be. So they're working on that as we speak.
Okay.
Great. So for clarity, you have been in contact with the Wyoming Retirement Board to have an understanding of the cost impact potentially to the retirement plan.
Yeah, Chair Dedica, that's correct. We have.
Great. Okay. Representative Swanitzer.
Thank you, Chairman. All 5 of the people in question they're post-certified?
Yes, sir.
Then follow up, Madam Chairman.
Oh,
And so this is at least the 4th, maybe the 5th time in my tenure we've delved into this topic. And I got really, I'm not sure if it was last time, but one of the times I got very close, but actually we had 2 of the employees who were already in the Wyoming retirement system, which is in a different category than the law officer enforcement. And they had some type of structural issue on that type of transition. And so we had to do some, I think we just made a statute or attempted statute to protect those people and let them choose which retirement program to stay in. And I just want to make sure if we have a bill draft that that is also considered. I don't know if any of the current people, I assume they're all currently in the Wyoming retirement system standard plan, and they would have to be jumped into the law enforcement plan, or it would be an option for any new person coming on, however that's structured. I guess my question was, with that, are you looking at the current people being able to move into the law enforcement retirement system, or is it just for any new person coming on board in the future?
Chair, that is something we've researched. And we are looking at all those options with the state retirement board about how it's to be transitioned. Someone who could possibly been in the law enforcement retirement plan before, retired as a sheriff's deputy somewhere, came to us, now they're on the public employee retirement program, then how would they transition back? And they would have that option to do so. It depends how that would benefit them the most on those retirement plans. So we're looking at those as well.
Further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Is there any further public comment on this? Anyone online? I don't think that I saw anybody signed up. All right, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. Representative Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd move that we draft legislation for our next meeting or subsequent meeting to put any state parks and cultural resource employee who's also post-certified or a law enforcement officer into having the option of joining that retirement plan. I did find, I think one of the previous iterations I liked was House Bill 245. It's from 2013. So it's 13 LSO 0609. And as I said, well, that's my motion, Madam Chairman, and happy to discuss.
Seconded by Co-Chairman Olson. Discussion.
So,
Representative Zwanitzer?
Real quick, Madam Chairman, I would say that the issue had been controversial in past sessions, but since then we have enabled, as you can tell, the community college, anyone who is post-certified, and so to not allow the state parks to have that same privilege we have bestowed in the past couple of sessions to other post-certified doesn't make sense anymore. And so I strongly encourage your vote of aye.
Further discussion? And recognizing this is just a bill draft, there's a lot of information that we still need, but I think it gets the ball rolling in the right direction. Recognizing the disparity that currently exists for post-certified officers working for state parks not being eligible to participate in the law enforcement retirement plan, which by all other accounts, they should be eligible for. So with that, any further discussion? Question, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just a general question. When we brought in the other law enforcement people into the plan, were they also part-time people included with that change? Or was it just full-time? Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
I might be able to help here. I serve as a liaison to the Wyoming Retirement System Board, and then also just my understanding of how the plan works. You're either eligible for it or you're not, based on the plan requirements. And so the difference with the law enforcement retirement as opposed to the public employee retirement system, there's just a different way that it accrues for law enforcement officers, post-certified officers, as opposed to the public employee plan. So I'm assuming if whomever is eligible for the public employee plan would also be eligible for law enforcement so long as they are actually law enforcement qualified. And so I don't think it has to do, I think that going down the rabbit hole of part-time or seasonal is probably not relevant to the inquiry based on the plan's I mean, we'll get that information, but I don't think it's probably relevant based on the plan's current requirements for whether or not you receive benefits, which usually requires full-time employment. But we'll certainly get that information at our next meeting. Any further questions or discussion? All right, with that, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. Long drive. Good to see you.
Well, thank you.
All right, with that, we are a little ahead of schedule, which is how we roll on the second day. We could go into some drone discussion, follow up from yesterday, or move on through to our judicial branch updates. I see Ms. Butler is here, our state court administrator. Welcome, Ms. Butler.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee. My name is Elisa Butler. I am the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. I'm just here to give you a few updates on what we've been working on recently, but if there's anything more specific that you would like me to speak to, I'd be happy to do that. So one of the things I guess initially I would like to say is thank you so much for all of your support during the session. It really made a huge difference for our branch. Getting new judges, getting raises, all of those things are incredibly helpful for us to help to operate into the future. So thank you for your service and thank you for your support of the branch. We appreciate it. The first thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is along with during this past session, as you all know, there were in raises to state employees. So we're currently working on implementing those raises and hopefully we will be ready to do that as of July 1st. And during the interim discussion with joint appropriations, I heard Chairman Perkins talk about how this was just a down payment for compensation for state employees. And I do hope that is true. It is something that we are struggling with. And I think everybody across the state is, but keeping good employees is something that's very important and something that we'll continue to work on into the future. Just an update on the new judges. So as you all remember, we got 3 new district court judges during this last legislative session, one in the 6th Judicial District, which encompasses Campbell, Crook, and Weston counties, one in the 3rd Judicial District, which encompasses Sweetwater, Lincoln, and Uinta counties, and then one in the 7th Judicial District, which is Natrona County. The Judicial Nominating Commission has already begun the process for selecting the judge in Natrona County. They have space available currently. So I believe those 3 names have gone to the governor and the governor will need to appoint that here in the next couple of weeks. The other 2, the other judgeship that will be, that has space available and that will be working, the Judicial Nominating Commission will be working on appointing is in the 3rd Judicial District. So I think if you have seen, there has been quite a bit of turnover with judges over the last few months. And so the Judicial Nominating Commission is working very hard. We anticipate that the judgeship for the 3rd Judicial District will be done hopefully by the end of the year. So that's something that's in the works right now. And then the additional judgeship for the 6th Judicial District, if you remember right, that judgeship was approved or that position was approved, but there was no money appropriated. And that is simply because in the 6th, there is not yet space available for a 4th District Court judge. So we will likely be coming back to you, hopefully in the near future, to talk about the fact that that space is available and we'll need an appropriation for that 4th judgeship. So that's the update on the new judges. If there are no questions on that, I have a few others for you. Okay. The next thing I just wanted to give you an update on is the Chancery Court. So the Chancery Court was live as of December 1st, 2021. So we have been open for business since that time. We currently have two cases that are set for trial, I believe at the end of the summer. So that is moving along. We are hopeful we'll get more cases as time goes on, but it's moving and trials are coming. So that's an exciting step forward for the Chancery Court. And then the last update I have for you is just on e-filing in the district courts. So this is something we've been working on for a very long time, and I'm very happy to say that it's close. If the attorneys in this group may have remembered seeing an email for e-filing rules that have been recommended by a committee, that those rules are being finalized right now and then will go to the Supreme Court for adoption. Our goal is to go live with the 1st District Court on e-filing in August. So we're about, 2-3 months away. So we are moving forward with that project. The rollout of that will be court by court, so county by county. And it will likely be Albany County first, and then we'll go on to Laramie County. And then I believe Fremont County will be the 3rd court. And the timing of that really will depend on how that first pilot court goes. So there's always going to be a few bumps in the road when we implement a new software system. So we want to be careful and make sure that it's working appropriately before we roll it out to the entire state. So we've got a plan, we're moving forward, and we're excited about the next steps. So that's really all I had to update you on today. Again, unless there are specific topics that you would like me to speak to, which I'm more than happy to do.
Co-Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Ms. Butler. So it's so surreal that the e-filing is rolling out. So thank you as a member of the bar for that. But I want to thank you and the court for your work on standing up the Chancery Court and getting it off and running. A week ago, I was meeting with some folks from Taiwan, and they are working to relocate potentially 3 new businesses, and Wyoming is one of the opportunities for them. And the Chancery Court was actually on a top list that excited them about doing business in Wyoming. So I just want you and the court to know that all your work that has gone into that, it's not just about the filings that you see in it, but that there's actual economic activity occurring and it's on their map. So good job to you and the court.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a great team who worked really hard on that. Ben Birmingham, who you will hear later today, is the director of Chancery Court, and he played a very big role in getting that court up and running. So big thanks to him and to the rest of the members of that committee who worked really hard to get it up and moving in a quick timeline.
Thank you so much. Representative Zwonitzer.
Thanks, Benjamin. So over the past year, we've lost 5, maybe 6 judges before the mandatory retirement age. And I know we've talked a little bit last year about how to encourage more people to run. We have that constitutional amendment that saying they can stay past age 70, but that apparently in the pay we've upped the past couple of sessions over the last 5 years. So I guess I'm asking for maybe you to opine if it's not the retirement plan and it's not assumedly the pay. Is there anything else we can be doing to not be losing judges, and maybe why, and as the Supreme Court figured out maybe why they're resigning and we're losing them before we need to?
Ms. Butler.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Zwonitzer, to opine on the reason is a difficult one. And what I would just say to that is, as with any job, I think sometimes it's just not the right fit. And so there's always that consideration to take into account. We have had a lot of turnover. Some of them, I would say most of them are due to retirements. And so there are a few who have decided to leave being a judge before the mandatory retirement age or before they've retired. I think, there is a lot of discussion amongst the conferences about how to make the job more attractive, not only through pay and retirement, but also some of the, life experiences that judges have. It's an isolating job and can be incredibly difficult sometimes. And so we're really just trying to work toward a better understanding of how we can support the judges and make sure that we can retain them for longer periods of time. So those discussions are ongoing right now.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. I do need to share with the committee and the public Senator Kolb's theory as to the concern over judges, which really the cause is lawyers. It's the lawyers. So I appreciate Senator Kolb thinking about it. We're trying to find solutions. Do something about all those attorneys. Any further questions or updates, Representative Washit?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment on the Chancery Court. The Turner County legislators had an opportunity to tour the court recently. And I think it's a very nice balance between having a very attractive courtroom and a functional courtroom, but not being austere or over the top luxurious. And I think that it's really well designed and a very attractive room. And I look forward to the day when all of us are meeting in Casper in September and we can all see the courtroom. The view from the judges' chambers is quite attractive. That ought to help retain a judge.
Further questions or discussion with the court? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here. We'll acknowledge our district court judge here in the room, local district court judge Jason Conder. Judge Conder, thank you so much for being here and being part of the committee today. It's great to see you. Hope you all remember Judge Conder from his previous visit with us at the Capitol. So good to be here in your hometown. All right, with that, we will go to Representative Shelley Duncan. I think she's online. Representative Duncan, good morning. Great to see you. We know that you submitted an interim topic to the committee and believe it might fall within this category. So would love to hear from you about that concern.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman and Co-Chair. I will just give you a quick little brief overview, but the parties involved, our county prosecutor and our county clerk, were prepared to testify, but they decided, they gave me a statement that they're separately working with this, with the judicial system and the clerk organization, with those organizations, and they continue to collaborate and ensure that this doesn't happen again elsewhere, and perhaps within those policy changes resulting in an agreed uniform process rather than legislative action. So I got that just now, right before I was gonna appear, and they made that decision last night. Evidently there's pending, there's actually pending written response from the Supreme Court on this issue. So that's why they're holding off on any of their response. But I will just go through real quick. I'm not going to be able to add much, but I'm going to go ahead and give you just an overview of what happened here. And we just felt like there's several topics that need to be addressed generically, separate from this issue. So I'm not sure if it's happened all over, anywhere else in the state, but from July 2014 through December 2018, we had a clerk of court embezzle $209,000 from our county. The county had a $10,000 bond is all for any sort of restitution or issues or problems. So one of the problems is due to the sensitive nature of the accounts and the files in this office, it excluded the county from the audit process. So the court never audited through the state or by the county. It's my understanding, some of the testimony came out that nothing was looked at since 2012. And then when they went to ask for help, there's a miscommunication on the system between circuit versus district. So one of the follow-ups was, the other key part is insurers. There's a downfall or a misconnect with insurers in terms of being able to protect the county in that situation too. So previously, this is a statement that I got to submit the interim topic. The antique laws creating the county elected offices for district court clerk were originally designed to allow counties at their discretion to utilize the county clerk rather than a separate official. All counties have, in at least 100 years or so, created an elected office, but the circuit court are different as they are clerks of the state as in employees. The irony is that all of the funds of the district court handled by the county official are state funds, and the county doesn't audit them. The state will not permit access and arguably can't get adequate insurance because they are not funded within the control of the county. So this is perhaps a statewide issue. In practice, what happens is the state and the county sign contracts with the state saying, we agree to appropriately deal with the funds, state funds, but the state will not let the county have access to those accounts due to privacy concerns for auditing purpose. So we trust you to handle the funds, but then you can't go in and take appropriate accounting measures. So there's a problem there. The other part that was brought up was the dishonesty of an employee. What type of bond should the elected district court clerk or any other elected official, whether it's anyone that handles money, the district court judges get to make that decision about how large any dishonesty is. And they get to, the idea is to ensure the safety, sanctity of the state funds and to allow those bonds to change depending on the amount of money involved. But in reality, the judges don't have that time or ability or the discretion to deal with insurers for the county elected officials. So that doesn't work either. So there's a problem with insurers as well. So there's some disconnect happening, and it just brought up a lot of things of what happened, where things went wrong. And so I just felt like it was pretty important. And at the time, my clerk, as well as my county prosecutor, all felt that this needed to be looked at as a holistic situation. Where are we going wrong? Is it a policy issue, or is it a state issue? Is it a transparency of streamlining accounts? How and where do we get this fixed? So unfortunately, you can't hear more details from the parties involved, because they're stepping back until the Supreme Court written decision is made. But I at least wanted to appear and put this out to you and have it on your radar.
Thank you, Representative Duncan. A couple of questions. So I'm just going to get some clarifying pieces. My understanding, is it correct in that the clerk who was charged with embezzlement of some sort? Correct? Yes. She's
Yes.
nodding her head. Yes. For the record, for the transcript. Sorry, it's a habit. And then she was convicted. Is that correct?
Correct. She was convicted and sentenced. And now the clerk, or deputy clerk, one of the employees found the discrepancies, and that's how this all happened. And she's our current clerk, and she's still having to deal with cleaning it up. Once
Sure.
we went to, the county had to pay $120,000 on short notice to make the state court funds whole. And the state did not help repay that, did not give us any help. So out of that 209,000, we had 10,000 in a bond. So we ended up having to pay, as a county of funds that's one of the poorest counties in the state, $120,000 quickly.
All right. Thank you, Representative Duncan. So then after she was convicted, did she appeal that decision, that result? And that's what's in front of the court? Is that your
I
understanding?
don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Questions for Representative Duncan? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Duncan, in regards to the bond and the statement you made that judges are supposed to decide and deal with insurers, where is that in statute, or where does it say that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Rodriguez-Williams. That
Representative Duncan, I'm just going to kind of intervene here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep you on screen. I'm going to bring back up Ms. Butler. I'm going to bring up District Court Judge Condor. Hey, welcome, great for being here. And are there district court clerks here with us in the room? Welcome, please come forward. Everyone else in the room, come close. All right, so I brought some backup for you, Representative Duncan, in light of the fact you just were kind of informed of this and don't maybe necessarily know some of these details, but we have some folks in the room that may know some of that. Ms. Butler, I'll go ahead and start with you. Judge Condor, what I'll be directing maybe some questions to you about this topic is what role the district court judges actually have with the district court clerks, and if you actually have anything to do with that process. So think about those answers. And then Ms. Butler, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to give you a little bit of background and history on how the courts are structured. And I think this may give you a little bit of context as to what happened and everything that's occurred since that time. So the circuit courts in the state of Wyoming are statutory courts. They were created by the legislature, and in that legislation, they are governed administratively and fiscally by the Wyoming Supreme Court. So that includes the judges and the clerks in those offices. The district courts are different. District courts are constitutionally created courts. And so in the Constitution, the clerks of district court are elected officials. They are independently elected officials. They do not answer to the state, and they do not answer to the Supreme Court. They are independent entities. The district court judges are also independent of administrative and fiscal control of the Supreme Court, and that is statutory. So that's in statute. So the disconnect here, I think, is, well, at least the position of the court is that as the district court clerk in Goshen County was a county employee and not an employee of the state, we essentially have no authority over those district court clerks. We do not audit their funds. We do not help insure them. We don't require their bond. That is all required by statute. And so the authority of the Supreme Court when it comes to the district court clerks is incredibly limited. And so just to give you a little bit of context there, we do provide a case management system to the district court clerks. And that case management system provides for record management and account management, depending on how, and the clerks use it, but they all use it. They use it a little bit differently depending on, how they've talked to their counties and what works best for their own courts. And so we train, but the way that those systems are used really are up to the elected officials in each one of those counties. And so that's just a little bit of background and context in terms of why, the state didn't pitch in when there was an embezzlement, and that is the position of the state is that was a county employee and not a state employee. And so the responsibility lies with the county.
All right, questions for Ms. Butler, or do you want to hear from Judge Condor next? All right, Judge Condor, if you would.
Once I figure out the mic. So thank you for having me and bringing me into something that my colleagues will surely question me about later. Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee, I would be glad to answer any question. I think Ms. Butler said it best, that the Wyoming statutes create clerk of district courts or elected county officials. The statutes provide that the district court judges are to work with the clerk of district court. So how that's interpreted in different counties across the state, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's an awkward balance at times because you have an independently elected county official that runs for office, puts up signs, goes to the county commission meetings as an elected official, whereas a district court judge is appointed. I have no supervisory authority over the clerk of district court. I'm not their boss. They are not a state employee. So here in Fremont County, we work out great. It's just working together arm in arm for the collaborative effort. So I guess that's about all I can say is the statutes are clear what the role of the court is, what the role of the clerk of district court is. And it's like anything else in life. Sometimes there's great situations and sometimes there's not. So I'd be glad to answer any questions on that front.
Thank you both. All right, questions for these two, and then we'll go next to the district court clerk. So if you want to hold your questions are appropriate for these two. Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just for clarification's sake, they're not employees of the county. They're paid for by the county. They're elected officials, just to be clear. Now, I think what I'm hearing so far, maybe I wondered if you could think about it, is that, I was county commissioner for 8 years. So I was involved with that situation, but the audit situation is what I guess wanted to really focus in on. Is anyone clear? Because I don't remember the counties auditing the clerk of the district courts. And I think for some of the reasons I just heard, so there's a disparity between the ability of the county to do any auditing to catch such things, maybe because there's a statutory problem with doing that. I'm not sure. So I'd like to hear if you know who audits the clerk of the district courts. Does anyone know? That's my really first question. Thank you.
All right, so we'll direct that to the district court clerk. So wonderful to see you here this morning, and sorry for bringing you forward, but know you are equipped and prepared to handle these questions. But if you would introduce yourselves first, and then feel free to answer these questions.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, representatives and senators. My name's Ann Sutton. I'm the clerk of district court in Teton County. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this very important topic. We all agree, the integrity of public funds and fiscal stewardship. So in Teton County, certainly we are audited. This is an unfamiliar scenario that I'm hearing about where there isn't an audit or access to funds. In fact, by the direction of our treasurer and auditor. And so just to walk you through a little bit, every month we send a full package to our treasurer as is required by our treasurer. That includes reconciliation of all our bank statements, all kinds of supporting documentation of all funds we received in and dispersed out. As you can expect, all of the funds that I touch as a district court clerk are directed essentially by the statutory fees that are in place or court orders, judgment and sentences, child support orders, things of that nature. So it all is driven by those statutes and those orders. The one exception would be we're a passport acceptance facility. So we do accept passport application fees that aren't driven by statute or court order. So every month we send that information up to the treasurer. The auditors visit us. They do an audit every year. They come into our office, and whatever the auditors need, the auditors get. That's been our experience because that's the important part of the process. The other thing, and we have courts of all sizes, so this looks different is my understanding, but I would call myself a mid-sized court, Teton County. You know, we have the separation of duties. Again, as is required by our cash handling policies that we submit to and is reviewed by our treasurer. So every month end process that I do, I actually have another staff initiate, take all the way through to completion, and then I review. So we have 2 signatures on that month end process. So there's 2 people with eyes on who internally could speak to anything that didn't seem right. Any check that goes out in our office has 1 signature, but also is reviewed by me. So there's all of these separation of duties that we work to accomplish. So that's been my experience. Certainly, we hope it's as strong as it can be, but my understanding from talking to colleagues is that's what you see in most, if not all counties, and perhaps with this exception. They'll have to speak to it. We have 2 other clerks of district court here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Briefly, thank you, District Court Clerk Sutton. Great to see you. Who are the auditors? Who pays for the auditors? And how are you subject to the auditors?
Sure, and I will, Ann Sutton, Clerk of District Court. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will do my best here because I basically respond to what's requested of me. I think our treasurer and our clerk could probably speak better to this. But my best understanding, 20 years with the county doing audits in different court programs, is they have a private contract with auditors who come in and, as you'd expect, go through the entire county. This is true for all of the other elected offices that have funds, all of the departments that have funds. I think I'm getting away from your question. Your question was who does the audit?
Well, you answered it, which was that some
Yes.
private entity,
Yes.
professionals that are
It's-
contracted with by the county.
In my understanding is experience with government accounting.
Great. And then you agree to be audited by the county.
Yes, and quite frankly, I understood that to just be standard in what's required.
But you, Co-Chairman Olson?
Yeah, and maybe Representative Craigo might know the answer to this, Ms. Sutton, if you don't, but my question is very similar, but I'm trying to understand if there's a statute that requires that audit. I would assume that there would be, and if there's not, it sounds like the way you're describing is the practice that I would assume every district court would engage in through that audit process. But I'm curious if there is a statute that directs us. If there is, that statute would tell us whether it's an external, internal audit, like Co-Chairman Nethercott's questions were geared towards.
Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, I honestly am not sure what about if the statute exists. It's just been on my experience in my entire government service that we have these audits regardless of the position I've been in. So that would be something perhaps someone else could answer.
Representative Craigo, do you know?
I believe it's in Title IX, but I couldn't tell you the exact statute number. But there's different levels of audits depending, for example, if you take federal funds and a certain amount of federal funds and you have to have a more extensive type audit, but yes, so pretty much every public entity in Wyoming has to go through some sort of audit every year. But it has varying degrees based on how much money you take in or put out. And so most counties hire, and there's a couple firms in Wyoming that do most of the audits because it's a special kind of accounting. And so most counties just contract with the same people, and they come back every year at the same time and spend a couple weeks in every county and do the audits. But I don't know the exact statute number.
Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Chairman Olson, two things. First, in the clerk of district court statutes, there's nothing specifying an audit. The statute in Title IX that Representative Crago referred to is 91507. And that statute requires the Director of State Department of Audit to supervise the books, financial accounts, and financial records of all state agencies and institutions, counties, school districts, and municipalities. What's unclear to me right now is whether the clerks of district court would be included in that list.
Okay, so let's go to the other district court clerks here for just a second and give them an opportunity to comment here as well and introduce themselves, and then we'll follow up with more questions. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee. My name is Patra Lindenthal. I'm the Clerk of District Court in Park County up in Cody. Ditto what Ann said. Since my tenure in the Clerk of District Court's office in 1992, the county has hired outside auditors for all of the offices, is my understanding. And we have a commissioner, a longtime commissioner here, Mr. French. He can attest to that, I believe. I don't recall the name of, but it's a private company that comes in, audits all the offices. My understanding from the get-go was that was every single audit. Every single office was audited. So whatever the auditors ask for, we provide. If they feel the need, they'll come up, pull a case, pull the financials on the case, and make sure everything is as it should be. They don't do that so much anymore, but they audit all of our accounts. The Clerk of District Court holds accounts for various cases. Maybe the judge has ordered, we hold money or whatever. So we open an account at the bank and hold that money until the court orders it paid out. Plus we have child support monies that come and go, and money we collect from fees and fines that are dispersed according to statute. The monthly reports to our county clerk surmise everything we've collected, and the money we take in goes back to the county, and at any time our books are open for anybody to come and look at what has gone on.
So curiously, Park County provides its monthly reports to the county clerk. Teton County provides it monthly to the county treasurer. Is that correct? All right. Next district court clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. I'm Terry Cornella from Hot Springs County. My court probably is more similar in size to Niobrara's than these guys. We had a similar situation. Every month I send a report to the treasurer of our financials along with the check that goes to the county. Our county books are audited yearly as well. They audit all of our financials, our child support financials, and our everything that we take in, they're aware of. And they have access to it anytime. And like the other two, I think we're all just very similar. I don't know how that happened, because I would have thought that everybody was audited yearly as well. We also have a paper backup. I have one staff member. And so we both know everything that's coming in and everything that's going out. And we have all our restitution and fines still on a paper backup, for which I've been made fun of. But so yeah, and I'm happy to take any other questions. Thank you.
And so you testified that you cut a check to the county?
Yes. Yes.
All three of you cut a check to the county. So what is that check and why is it going to the county?
Madam Chair, that check are the monies that are statutorily required by our office to distribute back to the county treasurer. And I think I misspoke before that we give our reports to the clerk. No, we give them to the treasurer. But anything that we collect statutorily that goes to the county treasurer, we cut. Funds to crime victims, restitution are paid individually to those entities through every month.
Perhaps we're locating the victims compensation surcharge fund decrease. Testimony from yesterday. So, all right, questions for the panel here that we have. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Coach. So I think it's, as mentioned, the government GASP standards, depending on the level of your county's involvement with federal grants, drives the quality of your audit, which I think has been briefly talked about. So Niobrara County apparently, doesn't maybe have that need to have that level of an audit. Sweetwater's setup sound like most counties, the way they currently do it. And indeed, it has a double check system to stop embezzlement. There's a bunch of safeguards built in because of, actually it was Enron that caused all this to happen and caused all this extra expense for the counties. So if everybody's having, correct audits done, what they do is they test the certain set of circumstances to make sure it's done correctly. And then with that test, that's how they prove their audits, right? So I think that sounds like it's being done in most places. From what I've heard, I guess please explain if it's not being done that way to your recollection, but I too would like to get to the bottom of what happened.
Let's go to Representative Duncan, who might have an indication as to what was going on in Goshen County and evidently why they were not following this practice that some counties do and some counties don't.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair. I would really hope that here sometime in the future, you would hear directly from those parties involved. From my notes and from the information I got was basically that there was a disconnect because of the secret nature or the classified nature of funds versus say regular county funds. So there was some of that problem, and I don't know if it's misinterpretation. I don't know exactly. But one of the biggest concerns for me out of all of this is, one, the clarification of our wonderful LSO staff, Mr. Fuller, saying that we do have people protecting or doing this correctly, but however, in the statutes, it's not necessarily clear cut as far as that the counties fall under the 91507. So that's my question. But the other thing is our issue was the insurers and the lack of bonding amount to cover. So that's another issue that I just really don't want lost in our conversation as well. So, and then what do we do when we do have an elected that is found fraudulent? Do we have sufficient protection for our counties or our state? So those are my big issues I want to make sure that are not lost in our great discussion and policies. And like I said, the statement from my clerk and the statement from my county prosecutor were that they were working behind the scenes still as far as a policy and maybe rules with the County Clerk Association, which we obviously see they have a consensus on things, but I can't answer exactly where things went wrong. I do know that it hadn't been audited for almost the entire tenure of this particular clerk. And the previous clerk, as she was leaving, stated that this needed to be done. This needed to be taken care of, and it never got done. And so I can't offer more. I apologize, but hopefully we learn more.
Thank you, Representative Duncan. I think that we're aware of the issue here without knowing the facts specifics on the ground from Goshen County, but certainly there was a clerk who embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of 8 to 9 months, it sounds like. And so how did that happen is the question, and we're exploring that now. Representative Washit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. For whoever on the panel, coming from Natrona County, our judicial district is the county. In districts that are larger than one county, is there a district court clerk elected in each county? And is there a separate bond per county, or is it per judicial district? And who determines the size of the bond?
Ms. Butler?
Madam Chair, Representative Washit, there is a separate district court clerk elected in each county, and the bond is set by statute. The amount of the bond, that $10,000 bond, and let me just see if I have that reference. 53208 is the statutory reference for that.
All right, further questions from the committee? Co-Chairman Olson?
I do have a question, Co-Chairman, and Representative Duncan, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer it, but we've definitely identified a statute that may be somewhat ambiguous as to the audit requirements. Testimony today from 3 district court clerks all confirmed the same audit process. I'm a little confused on whether an audit actually occurred. I'm a little confused on whether an audit actually occurred in your county. You've mentioned your prosecutor, you've mentioned your clerk. Have you talked to your auditor? Was an audit performed? Like we've heard, the annual audit, and this just wasn't seen in the audit? Because whether we're going to go down the road, one option for us at least today is, okay, we could clarify this statute. If an audit was never performed, that seems very obvious to us as lawmakers. Clarify the green book, make it really clear that the audit occurs in the practice that's been, explained to us. Heard you state that your clerk is working with some internal, some ideas on some internal policies, and I'm not really sure that unless there was an audit performed, that really makes a lot of sense. If there was an audit performed, sure. If there wasn't, then it seems like it's very clear to us that at least for that piece of the problem, we just need to clarify in statute, yes, you have to have an audit, and this is what it looks like. Do you know, Representative Duncan, whether an audit was performed during that clerk's tenure?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm not getting straight fact information. So whatever I would say would be hearsay. So I don't know that, I had heard that the last time the books were looked at was 2012, but I don't know that that's truly an audit. I have no idea, to tell you the truth. And I feel really embarrassed that I don't have all this information in front of you guys. I like to be prepared, and I was caught off guard, so.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This might be more of a philosophical question, but I'd like to hear from the clerks. Why is this an elected position? Does that make sense? Or would it make more sense to have this be an appointed position that's under the court? Anybody who wants to answer that would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, I'm not going to butcher your name, Provenza. That has been a question for a long time. Actually, the clerks of district court offices are constitutional offices, so the Wyoming Constitution would have to be changed in order to change that. To my knowledge, and I've been around 30 years, this has never happened in another clerk of district court. Circuit court, yes. Clerk of district court offices, this has never happened before. I think there were mitigating circumstances. I don't know. And like, yes, Representative Duncan said, it's very sketchy. Even the clerks have not really understood how she did this or why, especially how she did it and didn't. And the books, we're baffled how this could have even been pulled off. So it's a mindset, I guess, and you have to have maybe a devious mind to do this. We're all baffled why this would happen, and how she could get away with it. Because like I said, to my knowledge, in 30 years, none of the district court clerks, this has never even been a question. Everybody's books balanced. Nobody is embezzling anything. We even give receipts for $1. We won't take cash without handing the customer a receipt. So I don't know how she even did this. Other than that, I don't know. We're baffled by it, so.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Does anyone know the last time they changed the bond requirements? I just wondered if we could find that out when they were increased.
Mr. Fuller will find it for it in just a minute. Looking up the statute. Further questions for the panel? I made you a panel, by the way. Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When district court or the county hires an auditor, is there in the contract or is there some sort of like business associate agreement that covers the confidentiality? It was mentioned that an auditor can go in and pull a case file and so forth, and that the same auditors are used in many of the counties, but is that piece covered in the agreement?
Anyone who can answer? Clerk Sutton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Rodriguez Williams. I honestly don't know what the details of the contract are. I can speak to my experience that when the auditors have come to request something and they drill down, as Senator Cole mentioned, a lot of times they pick a month, for example, and they drill down into that month into many transactions. And then sometimes they pick, say, every 7th transaction or something like that. So I don't know. I unfortunately don't know the answer to the actual contract. I did want to just briefly mention that there is the contract audit, but I will share, and I expect my colleagues probably have a similar experience. We also regularly field questions from our treasurer on a day-to-day basis. If my statements aren't to her staff on the 10th of the month, I start getting an email for when those bank statement reconciliations are coming. This happened to me this past month when I had staff out of town and training in Cheyenne. I got an email on the 10th, the morning of the 10th, where is my bank statement? And we had it to her by the end of the day. I've also had the treasurer call and say, why is there a check out of your account to Wendy's? Which is a great question. And we had restitution being paid to Wendy's, but I just wanted to share that there is that day-to-day component as well, separate from the official audit. And I'm happy to contact our treasurer and get you the answer on the confidentiality.
I think it looks like an audit in the Goshen County situation. I'm just pulling up a news story. An audit was conducted, which revealed that there was about $210,000 unaccounted for after checks had been returned on sufficient funds. So looks like we need to maybe dig a little bit more into this issue. Any further questions? Mr. Fuller? Yeah.
Yep, Madam Chairman, I'm not sure it has been changed since it was first enacted. If it has, 1957, but I think that's just the reference to the old statute number.
The dollars change.
All right. Any final comments from the panel? Thank you for being here and kind of pivoting so fast. Appreciate you being under the spotlight and all the information you've provided. Senator
Thank
Cole?
you.
Just follow up on the bond, Co-Chairman. The bond is paid for by the Board of County Commissioners. They actually pay the bonds. So whatever they happen to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Kolb. Further public comment on this topic? Any final comments from Representative Duncan?
Madam Co-Chair, or Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to kind of pinch hit, not having the accurate information, which I don't like, but I hope that we have something that we can look at. The whole idea with this was organic, holistic, to just see this was a major problem. Do we have areas that we need to fix or improve? And like I said, my county clerk is working with the Clerk Association to maybe through their policies have something, but I just wanted a bigger picture, a bigger look at, you know, what do we need to look at? Do we need to fix it? Do we need to change it? You it was a big deal. So I appreciate your indulgence.
All right, thank you, Representative. Any final public comment? All right, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you, Co-Chairman Olson.
Co-chairman, I would like to ask for a bill to create a unified court system. That seems like a really big task for us. So maybe start a little bit smaller. I do think we need to learn more about the audit, knowing that there was an audit performed, but based on what Representative Duncan said, there may have been a gap between that audit and the previous audit. So I think it's worth, and it's an easy one for us to at least clarify the statute. I understand, I think it was Title IX, Representative Craigo, that really provides that clarity as a whole, but I think that there's no reason why we shouldn't go into the district court statute and just provide clarity that we should have an annual audit, like the process that we've heard explained. So I would make a motion for a bill draft to clarify the district court statute that an annual audit shall be conducted by the auditor of the county.
There's this moved and seconded by Representative Washut discussion. I think maybe a friendly amendment to your motion,
Sure.
Co-Chairman Olson, would be to just add expressly the district court clerk office to Title IX, to that statutory reference, that they are expressly included in the requirement for the audit.
Yeah, if that's the best fit, and I see a nod, I see two different nods from Fuller, one yes and one I'm not sure. Okay, all right, maybe Representative Craigo.
Representative Craigo, further discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I guess I'm a little bit concerned
Never
about
been.
muddying the waters because right now it says counties. Well, that includes all of our offices within the county, including the clerk of district court. They're already included in the statute. I don't think there's any ambiguity for those of us that work in that realm that district court is part of whatever county you're in. So if we specifically say counties and then clerk of district court, then do we have to list the assessor? Do we have to list any of the other offices or departments that actually handle money? Because I guess that's my concern, is by listing one office, we're creating an ambiguity about all the other offices. Does county only refer to county commissioners? Because in my mind, it refers to everybody under that umbrella.
Great point, Representative Craigo. Mr. Fuller, if you could read that statute again, and then maybe if we could think about the differences between a constitutionally created office, because I don't think assessors are, but I'm not certain. They are evidently, but are all county offices constitutionally created? And if so, is there some type of a distinction there, or is that irrelevant really? Mr. Fuller?
Yep, Madam Chairman. This is a requirement for the Director of the State Department of Audit shall supervise the books, financial accounts, and financial records of all state agencies and institutions, counties, school districts, and municipalities within the state. And then there's more that goes further into specific requirements, but that's the general language for that.
Madam Co-Chairman, Mr. Fuller, the beginning of that statute, I don't have it in front of me, I should just pull it up, but did you say state auditor?
The Director of the State Department of Audit.
Oh, of State Department of Audit.
It's the Department of Audit, yeah. And so I think we're aware that the Department of Audit is short-staffed, woefully short-staffed, and comes around every couple of years to most of those government entities to do some type of audit, which is likely what happened in this case. But it wasn't Goshen County's practice that caught it, likely, right? So that's probably the concern. But back to the motion, further discussion on the motion. Senator Culp.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Could we also add, or I'd request to add, a review of the bonding amounts that we currently have in statute? Can I amend the motion?
Let's do a separate motion.
Oh, well, I withdraw the conversation.
I'll be voting no on the motion, just a signal. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
That motion has failed. Senator Cole. It's 9:42.
I propose a bill draft that would review the bonding requirements for the clerk of the district courts. And being that, that's what we're talking about currently. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
So Senator Kolb, let's put a dollar amount in there. Move for a bill draft to increase the required statutory bond amount from $10,000
To 100,000.
Oh, and that'll just be a placeholder for us to review at our next meeting. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Washit. Further discussion. Co-Chairman Olson?
Yeah, and this would be a good question for Senators French and Kolb. I'm curious whether, because it is the county that one pays the bond, the county that is responsible ultimately for here, they're the ones that had to come up with the shortfall after the audit. Would it make any sense for the county commissioners to have the latitude to set the bond themselves, the dollar amount of the bond, versus us arbitrarily picking a dollar amount in statute? And I just curious from a county commissioner's perspective.
Senator French.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think it would be prudent for the commissioners to be able to address that, because you have rich counties, you have poor counties. Everything in between. Each county is a little different with their funding. But I agree with Senator Kolb that needs to be reviewed, but I would like to see it as not just the clerk of district courts, but every office, because the county commissioners are bonded also, I think anybody that in the county that's bonded, that's a form of protection to that county. So I would like to have all of them, reviewed,
Okay, back on the motion. Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I think there's a dichotomy here that I'd like to point out to everybody. Senator French and myself come from two different kinds of counties. I'd be classified as a rich county, and that's a poorer county. So I think the amounts of money are very relevant what Senator French talks about. He talks about the difference, and it's very true. But maybe not modifying the bill draft motion to put a minimum of $100,000 and then allow the Board of County Commissioners the discretion to raise it. Maybe we can have a conversation about what that is at a further point in time. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Have you just amended your motion?
I have just amended it.
Representative
Second
Washit
amendment.
finds that friendly. Does everyone understand the restated motion? All right, Representative Craigo.
I'm not sure. Did we amend the motion to include all the other offices, or are we only talking about
Only
clerks of district court?
Only the clerks of district court at this time. And I would ask that not be made a motion at this time for clarity of what we're moving. If you want to do that in a second motion. Representative Craigo.
And I think it's fine for today for purposes of bill draft, moving down that road. I just am curious what that's actually going to cost the counties. I mean, the difference in expenses, because I think a lot of counties are going to tell you, we don't want to spend that money. They've never had the issue. They don't expect to have the issue. And now we're going to be spending thousands of dollars on it's insurance. What exactly is, so maybe by the time we come back at our next meeting, we can get a handle on what that number is and what it's going to cost most of our counties.
I have no doubt we'll have the County Commissioners Association present to give us that insight. So further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. All right, further discussion? I'm seeing furrowed brows over there from the LSO staff. Want to talk about it? All right. Okay, further discussion from the committee. Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd be interested for next meeting, receiving some sort of information from the Wyoming County Commissioners Association on how many of the counties are auditing, how often, and the piece that I mentioned earlier, whether or not there's a confidentiality piece in those contracts.
Thank you, Representative Rodriguez-Williams. Probably also need to hear from the Department of Audit as well, as to how they operate and what their needs are and what happened maybe in this case, if they could speak to it. Representative Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just say, we have been through this, the good co-chairman out there and I, both on corporations and in revenue, when we've had other incidents. And so we have strengthened the Department of Audit's capabilities when it comes to all of our special districts. And when it came to our municipalities, the testimony several years back was that our counties have independent processes as independent electeds. And they were confident that they didn't need any extra special attention that wasn't already in statute, wasn't being done. So we did spend several years going through the audit requirements with the department, and they all came to corporations, but I'm sure they would love to see me again in this committee.
Yes, I do recall Representative Wanitzer that in recent years, there's been a significant amount of legislation passed regarding auditing of a number of government entities. I know this is not a unique circumstance that applied to the district court clerk, that a number of instances of embezzlement and improper accounting practices have occurred within our government entities. But for the Joint Judiciary Committee, just kind of give me a signal if that's where you would like to head in light of Representative, excuse me, Rodriguez Williams' direction there. Everyone looking forward to that at our next meeting? All right. Mr. Fuller, you clear? All right. Any further discussion on the topic? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You know, just in a cursory search in response to my own question about why are these clerks elected, what's the history with that, just shows that there are 27 states that elect them. And so I would just like to request a memo to get a review of maybe why there are different processes and look at why we have elected clerks, not to start any controversy, but I do think it would be helpful in knowing.
And that would be consistent with Co-Chairman Olson's kind of suggestion or consideration of unified court systems. I think the committee briefly touched on that in the past, so there might be some work that's already been done on that topic. Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Provenza, there is a memo. I don't recall if it was last year or 2 years ago on unified courts. I'm not sure it delves specifically into the question of, really, I think what it comes down to is the constitutional debates about clerks of district courts, but we can prepare a brief supplement.
That'd be great, Mr. Fuller. Thank you. Senator French?
Just a comment to Representative. I suspect way back in the day when they did that it was kind of a balance of power. Because if you have the county commissioners, and I was one for 18 years, if you have county commissioners and they're choosing the treasurer, they're choosing the clerk of district court, they're choosing the clerk, they're choosing the county attorney, all these elected, that's pretty powerful thing if they're in charge of all of that. I mean, that really opens it up to little kingdoms, little whatever you want to call it. I think it would be a dangerous road to go down. Just a comment.
Thank you, Senator French. All right, further discussion? Seeing none, that topic is closed. All right, any final public comment on judicial branch updates? I don't believe that there are any. All right, great. Committee, would you like to take a brief break? Come back at 10? No? Okay, no. All right, we'll take a quick break, come back at 10 a.m. All right, committee, we're coming back to order. It is 10 a.m. Want to make sure we get out of here on time, recognizing today's the last day and you have a drive home. So we'll stay on time, but we are doing okay for time. With that, we're going to start our next topic. And as you can see, there's a limited amount of time devoted to this, but I think a very important topic for the committee to consider, and hopefully one of our greatest pieces of work during this interim. And that is the safety of crosswalks. We'll go ahead and start the topic with an overview by Mr. Fuller. Or Mr. Hopkinson, who provided the summary for the safety of crosswalks. I kind of walk through generally crosswalk creation and some of the law associated with that piece. So Mr. Hopkinson, to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, just walking through the memorandum dated May 13th, 2022 on the topic of the safety of crosswalks. And this one comes before the committee as their priority number 7, dealing with the safety of crosswalks, and that the committee would review the law relating to that safety and consider whether legislation is necessary to improve that safety, particularly for students and persons using those crosswalks. Crosswalks generally are regulated in Title 31 of the Wyoming statutes, particularly in 31.5. The definition, this memo provides just how that is defined there on the bottom of that first page, describing what a crosswalk is. The Wyoming Department of Transportation is required to provide a uniform system for the traffic control devices, and they're generally responsible for the placement and maintenance of those devices on public highways throughout the state. Local governments are authorized to provide approved traffic control signals within their own jurisdictions and on highways under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation with the approval of the department. Local governments are also authorized to enforce and create their own traffic regulations by ordinance. And so that just kind of generally provides how that authority breaks down. Much of the regulation, I think, is provided by the Department of Transportation, some of which is through rule and regulation, just as far as what they're going to look like, what the the control devices look like, that sort of thing. As far as the laws in the statute go, pedestrians generally are subject to official traffic control signals. As many of you are familiar with, pedestrian can cross on a green light, not supposed to begin crossing on a yellow, and shall not cross on a red unless there is a pedestrian specific traffic control signal. When there is no signal in place, drivers are required to yield the right of way to any pedestrian who's entering a crosswalk by slowing down or stopping. They are prohibited from passing a vehicle that is stopped at a crosswalk to allow a pedestrian to pass. Pedestrians are prohibited from suddenly leaving the curb to walk or run into the path of a vehicle, which is close enough to them to constitute an immediate hazard. And any pedestrian crossing the road outside of a crosswalk is required to yield to all vehicles on the roadway. And there is one overarching general law applying to drivers that they do have the requirement that they exercise due care to avoid colliding with any pedestrian or person propelling a human-powered vehicle, such as a bicycle. With looking closer at some of the crosswalk statutes, there are some important distinctions. Specifically in Wyoming Statute 31.5602, sections A, B, and D, and those are there in the memorandum, but I just want to highlight some of those distinctions that you can see in those. Read together, those statutes imply that a driver must yield the right of way to a pedestrian at a school crosswalk, even if there's a pedestrian tunnel or overhead pedestrian crossing, whereas a pedestrian at a crosswalk that is outside of a school zone would be required to yield to a driver passing when there is that walkway or tunnel. There is additionally some language, if need be to yield, that's included in the general crosswalk language versus the school specific crosswalk language. And that implies that a driver only needs to slow down or stop if need be to yield to a pedestrian at your typical crosswalk, whereas a driver approaching a pedestrian about to enter a school crosswalk would be required to yield regardless of the need to yield. And specifically, that need to yield language was stricken in the last, when both of those statutes were amended in 1993. Any violation of those regulations that I've described is a misdemeanor, maybe punishable by a fine up to $200 on a first conviction, up to $300 on a second conviction within a year. And for a third conviction of the same offense within a year, it's punishable by a fine of not more than $500, 6 months in jail, or both. Generally, local ordinances in Wyoming related to crosswalks are in line with the state ordinances. Many localities specifically incorporate the state regulations into their local ordinances. Some of those primary differences you might see were differences in minimum and maximum fines, penalties, prohibitions on crossing crosswalks outside of in specific areas such as in business districts, prohibitions on riding bicycles across a crosswalk, and specific requirements for not stopping within the crosswalk or proceeding across an intersection unless there's space available. Finally, there's a list there of just some potential criminal charges that may be in play, particularly in instances where there is a collision. And those include murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, manslaughter, homicide by vehicle, aggravated homicide by vehicle, aggravated assault and battery, or reckless endangerment. And those are just some that may be applicable in these situations. And that's just kind of a broad overview, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Questions for Mr. Hopkinson? All right, seeing none. Let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Kusick again, if I pronounced that correctly. And committee members, we did receive an email here, and I forwarded it to you just to have it top of your inboxes here this afternoon or this morning. Good morning. If you would introduce yourself to the committee, and I apologize if I misspoke your name.
You nailed it. Thank you very much. That's rare. Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Michael Kusick. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Pathways, which is now based in Lander, Wyoming. Been an organization for over 10 years, working on human-powered trails and pathways through communities and public lands. As mentioned, I emailed a copy of a report from the League of American Cyclists that came out this year that listed Wyoming as the last ranked state in terms of safety for pedestrians and bicycles. That's a report that has categories that are weighted. The items that are weighted the most are the areas that we failed in. Those items are infrastructure and funding and policy and programs. We scored a B+ in the area of education and encouragement. So we have good, robust dialogue in our state. We have people in communities who want to see improvements, but we have challenges. Where it comes to the issue of crosswalks, we conducted a survey last fall. Oftentimes we're hearing anecdotal information from communities and citizens that they want to have more bikeable and walkable communities. But as we all know, in God we trust, others to bring data. So we put a survey out and we heard from over 40 communities so far, almost 200 people, many of which are asking for better, safer crosswalks, safer lanes for people who are not in motorized transportation modes, and more connectivity like we have in Casper with the Platte River Trail system, wonderful system, but it has many gaps in that pathway. And so we'd like to see those things improved and finished. I also sent a copy of a 2018 report on bicycle and pedestrian safety put out by 14 groups and individuals, including this body and state agencies, state departments. The top priority for the legislature was to improve and update statutes to help realize safety, economic, and health benefits outlined in the report. That includes all ages and abilities for those who seek alternative transportation to motorized. All ages starts at 8 years of age. So we want to think about safety for people as young as 8 years old. And that report in 2018, many great recommendations. We still see an opportunity there to implement some of those recommendations. The last thing I would like to talk about before I would take any questions, if you look at the data from WYDOT, as of 2020, the only area and mode of transportation where we saw an increase of injuries and fatalities was in pedestrian injuries and fatalities. We saw a 20% increase there. All other areas on the report, we saw a decline. So we're still seeing way too many injuries and fatalities. In fact, our goal, as it should be, is 0. Where we sit right now in Lander, we have a 2-block strip of 9th Street that has 4 crosswalks, leaving the school or aquatic center into a street that bends and curves and has become a thoroughfare out to Sinks Canyon. So it's a highly trafficked route. We have 4 crosswalks where kids are darting to and fro as they will, and we see that across the state. We have survey comments that I shared with you that are just fascinating when you ask folks, what makes your town safer and more livable? And I included some of those in an email I sent out yesterday. Some of the ones that stand out for me, a family from Saratoga, a mother wrote, you know, I'm just a mom, literally quote, I'm just a mom, but I'd like to have my kids be able to get to school more safely in Saratoga, Wyoming. We have places like Lander. I was on city council for a while. We have a Safe Pathways to Schools plan that, because of a lack of funding, both in the city and grants available, will take 10 years or thereabout to complete. So meanwhile, we have sidewalks that end in someone's yard. We have streets that are parking on both sides, no opportunity for a bike lane. I live just up the street here. In the morning, I see kids buzzing down 9th Street on their bicycles, fighting morning traffic to get to school. So we look at all of those things and we say, you know, we can do better for Wyoming. We recognize the great findings in that 2018 report. Would love to see us press play on those recommendations, increase funding. You know, YDOT right now is a great partner, but we feel like there's an opportunity to do more. Most states in the country average about 2% of federal spending on active transportation. Wyoming is at 1%. So we'd like to see that increased as well. I'd sit for any questions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Kusick. Any questions? Representative Washut.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a lot of communities have used traffic calming measures of various sorts to improve pedestrian safety, things like elevated crosswalks slightly higher than the rest of the road surface, alternative colored crosswalks, those sorts of things. I think those are all wonderful ideas, but any idea what it would cost to put that many crosswalks? I think that's the big impediment, right? Not that anybody wants to endanger pedestrians, but there's thousands of crosswalks in this state, and to use traffic calming measures to improve each and every one of those, it's got to be astronomically expensive. Comments?
It's Senator, or excuse me, Chairwoman Nethercott, Senator Washut, thank you for the question. It is expensive. Right now, our estimates on our survey, as I mentioned, from 40 municipalities, around 200 people, sits right around $100 million to complete everything. Of those projects, I would say 30% have to do with crosswalks and safe pathways to schools. Raised crosswalks is one way to increase safety. Things we're considering here in Lander, for example, are what is called putting a road on a diet. If you look at Baldwin as it leaves Main Street and goes in front of the high school up to the county Baldwin Squaw Loop, that's a 4-lane road that we would shrink to 3 lanes with a turning lane in the middle and bicycle lanes on both sides. If you're doing new pavement, the estimates are about $1 million a mile. To modify what we have existing, we put in a grant request when I was still on council for the TAP program. That project on Baldwin was going to be around $600,000. As you may have heard before, programs like RTP, Recreational Trails Program, and Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP, are oversubscribed. We will see an increase next year in funding, which is great. I'm also working with transportation, or our Travel, Recreation, Wildlife Committee and Transportation to look at different funding mechanisms for all of these requests. Many of the projects we work on are recreational, and we see those as projects for quality of life and economic impact, which is not minor, it's significant, but safety comes first. And if we carved out these issues for crosswalks and safe pathways to schools, you know, we believe there's money available and we can fix many of these urgent issues quickly, as opposed to having people apply for a grant one year and be turned down and have to wait another year just to put a road diet in over on Baldwin, not to mention what it would take to do here on 9th to make it more safe. But you're right, it's very expensive. We don't feel it's an unrealistic number to make crosswalks and pathways to schools more safe in Wyoming.
For the questions, Mr. Kusick, have you explored, I know that the US Department of Transportation has just issued recently $1 billion grant through American Infrastructure to rebuilding American infrastructure. Have you looked at qualifying for these grants, or how maybe that grant funding could be utilized here in Wyoming?
Absolutely. In fact, we spent time with our congressional delegation in March on lobbying day that the American League of Cyclists put on. we spoke with all three members of our congressional delegation or their staff, asking for support for that money to be fully funded for projects across the country and including Wyoming. I mean, we have staff on our small team at Wyoming Pathways who are well-versed in searching for grants and looking for those, and we apply for every opportunity. But yes, we're hopeful for those dollars to be, I think it's the BIL, what is it, the infrastructure law package that's coming through. We hope that gets approved with full funding. Right, as we looked at it in March, it didn't have a number attached. And so we asked for that, I think it was, to your point, if not 500 million, $1 billion to be attached to that.
I believe accurately it's 1 billion. And then in November of 21, the Transportation Department issued another $1 billion of grant funding available. Representative Washington. Senator Culp.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm not sure if I can pronounce your name correctly, sir, so I might not try to destroy it. Cusack? Mr. Cusack. Thank you for coming in. I would like to know, though, what your figures are for wintertime travel with bicycles. Because, you know, this is a state that has kind of two seasons, like wintertime and short summer.
Yeah.
In my area, I don't see a lot of folks driving around, you know, I mean, taking a bicycle is kind of dangerous, but what do you have for statistics for usage from winter months to summer months? Do you have something you could share with us? Thank you, sir.
And if you could relate that to crosswalks, that'd be great.
Do you bet?
The need for that.
Chairwoman Nethercott, Senator Culp, thanks for the question. I don't have data at my fingertips for that. In fact, maybe what you're referring to are most commonly known as fat bikes or people who are using recreational bicycles in the winter. In terms of traditional bicyclists in the winter, I agree it's probably a very small number, but we do see anecdotally related to crosswalks in our community. We've been paying attention for a long time. Many families here are cycling families and their children have fat bikes and they are riding those to school year round. I can find statistics for you and look for those and get them back to you, but I don't have those today.
Mr. Cusick, are you familiar with pedestrian bridges?
Madam Chairman, yes.
And are you familiar with the cost of those or whether or not they're effective in communities?
I should have the cost, Madam Chairwoman, I should have the cost of my fingertip, but I don't. They're incredibly expensive and very effective. You know, we have a couple in our state. We're currently, well, I can tell you what we're doing currently that would reflect some of the cost. In Wilson, Wyoming, my colleague Tim Young has worked with the community group there to put an underpass under Highway 22 to connect one side of Wilson to the other. And if you guys have driven through Wilson, that's not a great distance. But because it's a state highway, Wyoming Department of Transportation is not keen on having crosswalks there. So they raised $2 million to put an underpass under that short stretch of highway to alleviate safety concerns for folks who have to get across. I mean, that road is hardly ever not busy anymore. So that is the solution they came up with.
And are you aware of those pedestrian bridges for perhaps just a typical residential area where you might find a school crosswalk? Any familiarity with that?
Madam Chairwoman, the one that comes to mind is the one in Cheyenne, linking McCormick across the interstate, but I don't know of any others right off the bat.
All right, thank you so much. Any additional questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you for your time.
All right, Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, good to see you here this morning.
Nice to see
I hope you had a safe drive and it all went well.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind. I brought my friend and she is also the VP of our nonprofit.
Wonderful. If you would go ahead and just introduce yourself and your friend and the name of the nonprofit. And
Sure.
the floor is yours.
My name is Janelle Jones, and I have been a resident of Cheyenne, Wyoming for 28 years. I am married. My husband works for Union Pacific. We have 2 sons. And I work as a cosmetologist at a day spa in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I recently had started a nonprofit called Formac. Lisa Radcliffe here is not only my friend, but she is also the VP of that. And I will talk further into that as we go. Okay, So I just wanted to start by saying I'm very humbled and grateful for the opportunity to meet with the committee today to talk about my son and the Wyoming state law on vehicular homicide. While it is very difficult for me, I truly believe that sometimes we have to talk about the hard things in order to bring change. I am here today because of my son, Mikhaili Evans, who everyone knew as Mac. He is an energetic, charismatic 13-year-old who was funny, easygoing teenager. He had many friends of all ages. In fact, in the last 6 months, I've heard so many stories of various people and things that made me laugh and cry at the same time. His heart was so big. He touched the lives of so many with his kindness and friendship, and he left a ripple effect on our community in Cheyenne. There were no bad days when Mac was around. He took his time to put his arm around a girl who was crying in the hallway at his junior high while everyone else walked by. His teachers purposely sat him next to the child who had a learning disability because his patience and willingness to help his friend understand what needed to be learned. He went to great lengths to find out what his teacher's favorite Starbucks drinks were, just so that he could take them one to show a great appreciation for what they do. When I would walk home after work, he would meet me just to spend time with me, never short of hugs or jokes. His smile and laughter could fill the cracks in broken hearts of people he loved and cherished, which was everyone he met. He truly was everyone's friend. I am blessed that he was my son. I learned after having an older son not to take time for granted. Every moment counts because time goes too fast. Unfortunately, the 13 years for me went too fast. On November 5th, 2021, I received a phone call that every parent dreads. Our day started like most. I made him breakfast, set out his allergy medicine, woke him up to get ready for school. We chatted casually over breakfast about the upcoming day's events, and he was going to meet a friend after school to go to a movie. And I told him I needed him to pack his suitcase after the movie for his weekend trip out of town with my husband to a Broncos and Cowboys game in Dallas. He promised that he would do that. On the way to the front door, I can still see his smile. Mac turned to me and flashed me the biggest smile and enthusiastically said, "Mom, doesn't my outfit look fresh? I look drip." In teenage terminology, this means he looked cool. And I couldn't help but to smile back at him and said, "Yes, you do look cool." I hugged him and we exchanged I love yous. And like we always did, and he left for school a little early that day to retake a test, as he was invited to do so that he could get his grade up. If only I had known it would be the last time I would see my son smile, to feel his hug or hear him say, "I love you." 7 minutes after he left our house, the assistant principal from McCormick called me frantically, telling me to get to school. I could barely comprehend her words. I reached for my purse and ran out the door and immediately heard sirens so loud that they sounded as if they were in my front yard. As I approached the school, all I could see was my beautiful son, Mac, laying in the road. He was surrounded by first responders and firemen doing CPR on him. I sat on the curb and I watched in horror. My hands wouldn't work to dial my husband's number on the phone. I forgot how it worked. I am living my worst nightmare, helpless and in complete shock. They were continuously doing CPR on him while trying to get him on a stretcher to transport him to Cheyenne Regional Medical Center. They would not allow me to ride in the ambulance, so a Cheyenne police officer had escorted me. I was told the paramedics continued to do CPR on him the whole way. Once there, I was taken into a room where I waited the longest wait of my life. I could see nurses and hospital staff running up and down the hallway. Then 2 chaplains came in our room, and I remember thinking how nice they are, but why are they here? You are not welcome. You are only here because you were about to tell me that the worst is yet to come. No, they cannot tell me this. God would not allow this to happen to my sweet Mac. I was later met by the ER doctor and a neurologist who told me that his best chance of survival would be flight for life, and they wanted to transport him to Denver Children's Hospital. I was warned by the neurologist that if Max survives this, he will not be the same 13-year-old I knew just 2 hours before. He would be paralyzed from the neck down and likely have little to no brain function. As his mother, the selfish side of me, who just wanted to hold on to any slice of hope I could get and have the opportunity to hold my child again, I was going to take it. Once they finished getting numerous x-rays, CT scans, and ventilator tubes and surgery, and have surgery tubes to be put into his, surgically put tubes into his lungs, I was taken into the ER to be with my son. And I will not go into details, only to tell you that my son died in my arms at 10:06 a.m. that morning. I was able to stay with him for a little while after. I had a very difficult time leaving. I had to leave the hospital without my baby. My time with Mac had gone too fast. He didn't get the chance to finish his first quarter of high school, or he won't get to play another basketball or football game. I won't hear him getting loud on him or playing his video games with his friends, hearing his laughter. He will never kiss a girl, get his braces off, get a driver's license, go to prom. He'll never get to graduate or go to college, never have a family of his own or get opportunities that so many of us take for granted. He did leave his mark on our world though, in our little town of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Mac didn't fill one church at his funeral, he filled two. They had to live stream because there were so many impacted by this one kid that one church wasn't enough. Kids and adults showed up to pay their respects and show their love for the one who gave the best and the most to everyone who knew him. I learned more about the details as time went on that week, and I will tell you some facts. Mac was on the north end of a crosswalk that faced McCormick Junior High School. He waited patiently as the driver of a truck breezed over the crosswalk, not giving care or notice to him, wanting to cross the schools into the school zone. The next vehicle stopped, and then two more behind that one in the westbound lane. He looked again both ways. No cell phone out, no AirPods in his ears. He saw it was safe to cross, and he started to cross. The driver in the eastbound lane, who was not in his vision at the time initially of crossing, going through the school zone, carelessly looking at her passenger, which happened to be her daughter. Not at the road, she was looking at her passenger in a school zone, only turned to look at the road when her daughter shouted, "Mom." And she then went through the crosswalk without braking, hitting Mac at the speed she was going, only to brake after the impact. My son was so far from the crosswalk that when I arrived, I almost thought he didn't use the crosswalk. I knew my son better. I taught him to be safe. He had been over this crosswalk many times, and the one at his elementary school, and I just knew he would not do that. I cannot get into details as this is still a pending court case, but I can say that according to the police report that we have, there was a dash cam that was in use and that caught this incident in its entirety, as well as several friends and parents that had witnessed this accident. The driver admitted she was not looking at the road. She was, in fact, looking at her passenger. I believed in my heart that while there was no intent, this was not an accident. An accident implies that it was avoidable, and that is not the case. This is 100% preventable. Had she been looking at the road and not distracted, my son Mac would be here today and finishing his 7th grade school year at McCormick Junior High. He was happy and healthy before he started across that crosswalk, and he didn't get to make it to the other side because of her negligence. In the wake of Mac's death, I have started a nonprofit in his name called For Mac, a name given by his friends to show their support for a life that was taken from us all too soon. This nonprofit was established to improve the safe route to school plan in our community. It consists of 9 board members, myself included, and I am proud to say that with the help of our community and sponsors, we have raised over $110,000 since mid-February. And I was told 2 weeks ago by the city engineer that because of the amount we have raised and the grant money that received, that we will be able to get started on the McCormick project soon. We at Fort Mac have raised money to improve the safety around school. We will continue to raise money and improve the safety around schools throughout our community. The support we have been given has been overwhelming, but this is only one piece of the puzzle. I am asking you as respected lawmakers who have the ability to help make a change and to help me solve this growing problem. I have done research in our surrounding counties only to learn of many more stories similar to Mac's. Lives gone too soon and senselessly. Pedestrians hit on crosswalks by distracted drivers. In our state of Wyoming, as the law states, vehicular homicide is a misdemeanor and punishable by no more than 365 days of imprisonment and or a $2,000 fine. I also learned that reckless endangerment holds the same, no less than 365 days of imprisonment, but a $750 fine. That is only a difference of $1,250. It is a difference in our state between life and death by vehicle. As I had mentioned earlier, Mac's injuries were going to be life-changing, not only for him, but to our family as a whole, had he survived this. And I would be a full-time caretaker for him, and Mac would be trapped in his body. And that would not be something that anybody would wish, especially knowing the life that he had before. Well, I believe that we can all agree that no time served or dollar amount can equate to a life. I ask you, is 365 days a real punishment for taking a life? Most offenders don't or won't do the entire 365 days. They will have minimal jail time or probation. Where is the consequence for negligent or careless driving when being a driver is a conscious decision? A vehicle is a weapon if misused. As a mother, 365 days would be the easiest time served if I could get my life back before November 5th. That is not my reality. I am the one doing a life sentence. My child won't be coming home. I have to find ways to honor this precious life and to live out his legacy for him. And I understand that if the law were to be changed, it would not affect my son's case, but hopefully will help future victims' families, or in best case, to prevent more fatalities from happening. I'm asking you to consider making vehicular homicide a felony in the state of Wyoming. I am asking that we are comparable or even rise above our surrounding states, Colorado, Montana, Utah, who all see this as a felony, in an attempt to bring more awareness as distracted driving becomes more prevalent. 2 days after Mac was hit, and killed, 2 more kids were hit on a crosswalk at East High School in Cheyenne. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal, but it goes to show that people are becoming complacent in a hurry and talking to their passengers on their phones and careless to pedestrians. How many deaths do we need before we decide to make a change? Wyoming can do better and have a zero tolerance for negligent driving and set a standard of valuing life. A human life is no match for a vehicle, and it is far more valuable. My favorite quote was by Gandhi: "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And it is one I repeatedly told my sons. And so I'm asking you today to please be that final piece to the puzzle and make this change. I believe that the consequences need to have a bite in order to deter people from making these poor decisions. Pedestrian deaths can be 100% preventable. Driving is a conscious decision. It is a responsibility. And there needs to be a consequence for careless and negligent driving that results in the death of an innocent pedestrian. I would like the opportunity to answer any questions or receive comments on this topic. While it is difficult, I am willing to be open to it if it can bring positive change and hopefully save lives and bring awareness and educate others. I pray that we can work together. The Formac nonprofit can only do so much in our community. We can improve the Safe Route to School program, improve our streets and putting crosswalks, lights, more signs, change infrastructures, but none of that will matter if the drivers are not looking at the road. And we need them to take this, we need to take this privilege more seriously. I truly love our state, its people, sense of community and care, and I have faith in our lawmakers. Please do this for the state of Wyoming, its citizens, our communities, our children, and for MAC.
Ms. Jones, thank you so much. On behalf of the committee, please accept our condolences for the tragic loss of your son, Mac.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing his story. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for taking action and creating your nonprofit and trying to make a difference for the state of Wyoming.
Thank you.
Give you a minute. Committee members, questions for Ms. Jones? Senator French.
May I relate a story? I'll try. Sorry for your loss, but my son was the same age, and he was in a crosswalk with his friend, and a pickup went through, hit them both, and as my son, the tire was rubbing on his face as they skidded through the intersection. And when they stopped, he was looking, and the tire rolled right up on his friend's face. So I can relate, it didn't end up tragic like yours, but that close to killing my son and his friend. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble here.
No.
Because I almost lost him at the same age. I think the crosswalks, what I've noticed across the state is, I'll get it together here. Often they're painted, but they're faded. As time goes on, they're very faded. And as you're driving along, you're on that crosswalk before you know it, because you don't see it. It's not painted. I don't know how often. I know there's a cost to all this stuff, but I don't know. Sometimes they're not maintained once they're put in place and painted, or there's not a sign on the edge that says crosswalk or something, you know. So I can kind of relate. It's an issue, and sorry.
Thank you, Senator French. Appreciate you sharing the story, and we're grateful for your son being healthy today. Committee members of the room, let's just all take a deep breath in. But we're here to make a difference for the people of Wyoming. So further discussion or questions? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Again, condolences for what had happened. Just wanted to state to you that no amount of money is a value on a human life. You know, be it $1,000 or 100,000, it's a relevant number. The question is, what can we do? Ask, you know. So I'm just trying to understand this more, and like to, you know, I heard you wanted to make it a felony.
Yes, sir.
Right, that's your desire. I think so. On another maybe question to you is improved signage on both sides of the road. Maybe some alert. I'm afraid we can never stop people from not, you know, paying attention. They're driving basically a deadly weapon. A vehicle could kill anyone. So what can we do to improve, you know, the situation so we make this less likely? Because I don't, it's impossible to stop people from doing irresponsible things.
It is, sir. I do feel though that if we do increase the penalties, I do think that we can deter people from making these choices. I think it will bring a lot of awareness to this. So, you know, as I had said, we are doing what we can in our community, and if given the grant money, I feel that we can improve where we can. We'll do the best that we can with those improvements. But even with no matter how many amount of improvements that we make, if drivers are not looking at the road, it's not going to make a bit of difference that we do those, that we make those improvements. So by increasing penalties, like as I said, that some of our surrounding states have much harsher penalties for that, which I believe also has brought some awareness. But you know, time served is kind of a scary thing when, you know, but 365 days barely feels like anything when it comes to consequences, especially when you're looking at a close call versus an actual homicide, and it's the same, pretty much the same sentence, only $1,250 difference. I just think that we should look at that and look at what we can do to deter them.
Ms. Jones, thank you. We'll go to Representative Washut, and then I think that the committee can discuss options instead of directing those to Ms. Jones. So Representative Washut.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question about the level of police presence in crosswalks around schools in Cheyenne. I know in my previous career, when I was a young law enforcement officer, we were assigned a different school crossing every day. And the day shift officers all pulled the school crossing, and unless you had some other urgent call, we spent time in that crosswalk, and that was a great deterrent. We talked about deterrence yesterday, great deterrent. And people would see that police car and slow down. And so even if we didn't write a single ticket, the fact that there was a marked unit present. Today in my city, that rarely happens because of the volume of calls for service. And I'm just wondering what your experience has been in your city.
Well, actually, I had spoke to on a couple of different occasions when my son was still at the elementary school, the PD, because I had witnessed vehicles driving over crosswalks in front of the elementary school on Yellowstone. And the reasoning that they gave me was that they have 28 schools and they don't have as many officers available to be able to sit at all of the different schools throughout the morning in order to get the kids and at the end of the school day, in order to get everybody safely where they needed to be by the end of the school day. So they said they only have about half of that many officers available. So there has been some police presence, but you know, they kind of skip around to the different schools, but they're not always there to catch everything.
Any final questions or comments for Ms. Jones? Ms. Jones, thank you so much. Your comments and remarks were excellent and very helpful to the committee. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Appreciate you driving up today, and safe travels home as well. Further public comment? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. A couple of things that we have heard, just to kind of help maybe steer the discussion, is police presence, is our cities and counties and what they're doing potentially, what YDOT could possibly do to participate, and then also our criminal justice system. And so I see this being twofold, the conversation here today. One is to evaluate whether or not the committee wants to move in a direction of enhanced penalties associated with the crime, either incarceration or financial penalties associated with the differences. And then secondarily, if there's anything else we can do to get a greater understanding of how to enhance safety around these crosswalks in light of new federal funding and the role of law enforcement and the role of our cities, counties, and towns to prevent these types of tragedies from occurring. So with that, committee, let's start with discussion concerning penalties or enhanced crimes. Any discussion on that? Representative Washit.
I think we need a motion, so I'll make a motion that we ask for a bill draft to enhance the penalty provision of these types of crimes. To be equivalent, I believe we heard that Colorado and Utah have felony crimes. We use one of those two states as a model for making these sorts of events felony level crimes. And my comment would be that I'm not sure that increasing the penalty will have much of an effect without law enforcement presence and enforcement of the negligent underlying kinds of driving behavior. Simply increasing the penalty, most people don't know what the penalty is anyway, and so I don't think it has anyways near as much deterrent value as we might wish it would. But I think that it's not inappropriate to consider a felony level crime for the taking of a life.
All right, Representative Washit, thank you. One thing when we're making these motions, it's helpful to be as specific as possible as we can be so that LSO knows what to do instead of kind of filling in the blanks for us. So Representative Washit, you identified two states based on the testimony you heard, both Colorado and Utah, I believe. Mr. Fuller, do you happen, or Mr. Hopkinson, happen to know what those laws are in either of those states that you could speak to?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Colorado and Utah have gradations for felonies. So I know that in Colorado, I believe it's a grade 4 felony, which I think is relatively low. And I'm just speaking about the homicide by vehicle without any sort of driving under the influence. And then I think in Utah, it looks like it's a 2nd-degree felony. In terms of the specific years, I'll need to look that up quickly.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask Representative Washit to do before anyone wants to second and discuss it is to really help identify what you're seconding and what the motion is. And so Representative Washit, your motion is to make vehicular homicide a felony in Wyoming?
That would be my motion, with the penalty not to exceed 5 years if we need specificity.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Zwanitzer. Further discussion. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I guess my question for the bringer of the motion is, do we want to make this felony apply to all vehicular homicide or just that occurs in a crosswalk? And do we want to really pare it down to those incidences that involve crosswalks?
Further discussion? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, just for discussion, I mean, obviously this is emotional, this is heavy stuff. But it's just, I caution, really significant high penalties when we're discussing, accidents. It's just something I think that needs, needs talked about. I think Representative Washit alluded to this. I think the argument for deterrence when you're discussing accidents is low by definition. Distracted driving. And we can do high penalties. Does it help anything? Does it hit? Does it deter? It's certainly something I think that is a part of a discussion. Most everything we make significant crimes takes intent, takes malice, takes, things like that. And it's a different type and kind when we're discussing, negligent acts and accidents. So for me, I appreciate Representative Craigo saying, discussing maybe specifically putting this, if we are discussing making it a felony, that it's specifically with crosswalks, because as we've heard, and this happened in Riverton too, the harm is so significant in relation to crosswalks that, that maybe I would consider it. I probably would think along the lines of 2 years, but that's for discussion. But maybe specifically in relation to that, then I could see it being felonious, accidental conduct. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Representative Swanitzer?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. So I guess just a question. You could still, if we had a felony infraction, right, the prosecutor would still have the choice, to charge it under a felony and go before, a jury and a court hearing with that charge, or they could still have a misdemeanor charge. We're not taking out the misdemeanor charge, correct? So it's a tool in the toolbox for a case that a prosecutor would say the negligence standard was at a higher level, or crosswalk or extenuating circumstances do raise it to a felony. Would I be correct in that?
Representative Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Actually, I think we would be eliminating the misdemeanor charge. And so you would actually be reducing the options in the toolbox by making it strictly a felony. I mean, that was sort of my question regarding crosswalks, is that you would still have the ability to have we'd be creating a separate crime.
Senator Cole?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I would like to have a discussion about age. I think the age is an issue for me because kids are kids, and they're inherently not adults. So I think if you are dealing with a crosswalk and there's an underage person in that crosswalk, I think there should be something more, I don't know, an enhancement for such a thing, because of the nature of kids. I mean, it's just, I consider it people that, are unaware of the danger that they're facing. And what are we going to do about that? So I think there should be some sort of a conversation about age. I think age is very important here. If you're an adult or you're a child, they're two different things. And try to avoid the situation to begin with. Thank you.
Representative Oakley. And then I'll move to the right. So who all on the right wants to raise their hands?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just wanted to say with that, there's danger in making a law relative to who your accidental victim is. So I think it's safer sticking with crosswalks per se, rather than, doing something like, we had a vehicular homicide where somebody didn't scrape their window, and it wasn't a child victim, let's say, but it could have been. But the conduct was the same regardless of the victim. So I think there's danger there, but I think the crosswalk hits the age because it's largely children in those.
So two concepts there. One is Representative Craig identified crosswalks, and then there's also school zones. So consideration there for discussion as well. Representative Washit and then Senator Cooper.
Two things, Madam Chair, and thank you. It seems to me that if I'm the parent and my child is killed by a driver, an inattentive driver, it matters not to me whether my child was in a crosswalk, whether my child was riding a bicycle along the street. Or as we had here in Fremont County, child gets off a school bus and the driver goes past the school bus and kills the child. So I guess I'd be resistive to making it that narrow. But I would just remind the committee that what we're asking for here is a bill draft. We're going to have another meeting in September to work out details, to offer amendments, to improve and redefine. And rather than taking up all that time today talking about possibilities for how we might make that legislation better, because we always do, we work it for that purpose, that I would just say, let's get the bill draft done and we'll work out these kinds of details in September.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the prosecutors here. Is there anything right now that would preclude a prosecutor from charging a person who was negligent with a felony under homicide, or manslaughter.
Mr. Hopkinson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Really, it would just come down to the conduct of the driver. Some of the terms that you see are criminally negligent manner. That's the misdemeanor. There is already a felony homicide by vehicle, which would be if they are driving in a reckless manner. So whether a person's driving recklessly versus criminally negligent is a primary distinction in existing statute for how much punishment is available or for which particular crime. Certainly, there are other crimes that could be applicable as I described in that memo. You know, if they are knowingly or recklessly in circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life, that could be aggravated assault and battery. So there are other potentially applicable statutes, but it all comes down to kind of what level of conduct that person has, reckless, criminally negligent, etc.
Questions for Mr. Hopkinson on this, because this is really important understanding as it relates to this crime and all crimes that we touch on in the Joint Judiciary Committee, which is levels of criminal intent, which is the fundamental basis for criminal law, because we punish the conduct, the actor, the intent associated with it, the mens rea. And so we're kind of touching on that. So further exploration, any questions for Mr. Hopkinson on that? Co-Chairman Olson?
Co-Chairman, not really a question, but maybe a directive for our next meeting as we're wrestling with this bill draft and trying to figure out, you know, particularly what does a felony mean in Wyoming versus what it means in, for example, Mr. Fuller, he pulled the example in Colorado, and having gradations of felonies, you know, and being able to actually compare those, I think, for the committee to see that a 4th degree felony in a state may not mean a whole lot. I don't know, may not mean a whole lot different than a misdemeanor in Wyoming in this scenario. So when we say felony, if we want it to have the impact of Wyoming law in order to receive justice, we need to actually understand what, when we're looking at our other states, what they actually do. So I do think they don't want a full compendium of all states, but a nice comparison that would help us to understand what do other states really do. And to your point, Co-Chairman Evercott, is the committee is wrestling with the criminal behavior that is actually occurring, whether it be in the crosswalk or wherever. All of that plays into the degree of the charge.
Just want to remind the committee, we'll give it to Mr. Fuller. There is a motion. We'll dispose of that motion here in just a minute. Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Chairman Olson. You know, we can do, I think we could do that for the homicide by vehicle, a comparison of those, and in doing so, identify the penalty associated with those offenses.
I think it's helpful because however you vote, I think Vice Chairman Washat's point, you know, this is just a bill draft to get the idea rolling. And I think for committee members casting this vote, you know, we can't really flesh all that out right now, but having that information when we actually work through the bill draft makes a difference on how I vote. So I can see a lot of nodding heads today that we're not really sure what we're diving into. So I do think that's helpful.
All right, thank you, Co-Chairman Olson. Okay, back on the motion. The motion by Representative Washat is to essentially repeal the misdemeanor concept of vehicular homicide and turn it into a felony with a 5-year, 0 to 5 year term of imprisonment associated with it. There was an offer essentially to do a friendly amendment to keep the misdemeanor vehicular homicide and to create a new felony associated with vehicular homicide in a crosswalk or in a school zone. Those were rejected by Representative Washat, the bringer of the motion. So it is possible to either move forward by voting aye on the motion and repealing the misdemeanor and creating just a felony. It is possible for you to vote no and do a second motion with that, with the felony associated with the crosswalk and school zone piece. Those are kind of the options and what we can do next. So all those in favor of Representative Washat's motion, please say aye. All those opposed?
No.
That motion has failed. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would bring a motion to have a bill draft in accordance with my previous comments regarding keeping our keeping our current misdemeanor crime in the books, but also creating a new crime regarding crosswalks, school zones, and vehicular homicide within those areas.
Mr. Hopkinson.
Madam Chairman, Representative Craigo, just to clarify, are you looking for a separate crime or would you just like that as an enhancement to the existing crime? For example, if this occurs in a crosswalk, it's a 5-year felony. If it's outside of a crosswalk, it's the existing misdemeanor.
Enhancement would be fine, Mr. Hopkinson.
Second.
Mr. Hopkinson, do you think that should be a required element or an enhancement?
Madam Chairman, I guess I would ultimately leave that to Representative Craigo and what his preference would be.
No way. Other lawyers in the room? Any comments from anyone with a Juris Doctorate in the room? Cheap, cheap. Need to start billing the clock here. Representative Craigo, thoughts?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. By default, I'll go ahead. I think it has to be an element. I mean, if it is an enhancement, it automatically becomes an element of that crime. So it'll have to be proven, obviously, at trial.
Because there's two concepts for the lawyer, for everyone in the room, but making sure we get this right. If you have just a sentencing enhancement, that is actually not necessarily proven at trial. That may not be required. But if it is part of the statutory scheme and it is an element to be proven at trial that it actually occurred in a crosswalk. So issues associated with whether or not it's painted would be relevant to that concern. Things for consideration, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so I guess I might be confusing the terminology here versus enhancement. I'm not necessarily talking about a sentencing enhancement per se. I'm talking more along the lines of what you're saying, which is making an element of the crime with an enhanced penalty because of the additional element that has to be proved at trial. Does that make sense?
Getting a thumbs up. Does the committee understand what we're voting on? There's a second by Representative Zwaniter. Discussion, Representative Zwaniter.
Still have a question on my own second. So I guess my question is a motion for a school zone or is it for a crosswalk? Because there are crosswalks not in school zones. So I'm wherever the committee wants to go for direction, is it any crosswalk where a pedestrian has the right to feel safer? Or are we talking just in designated school zone areas where this would be an enhancement?
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would say any crosswalk, or it does, I don't know if it necessarily has to be in a school zone. I just think we were referring about if you're in a school zone, whether the child is in a crosswalk or not, if you're operating your vehicle in a negligent manner, you could still be subject to the enhancement. Does that, if the child is standing on the edge of the road and you're not paying attention and you run over the child, that could be subject to the new penalty.
So Representative Zwaniter, it encompasses both concepts, both the crosswalk and the school zone. Representative Zwaniter, further
And Madam
discussion?
Chairman, it encompasses adults as well. So this is that we're not separating any kind of element for age.
Correct.
Anyone in a school zone or in a crosswalk, adult or child.
Correct. Further discussion, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I guess I have some concerns about this specifically if we're using a school zone or crosswalk. We heard yesterday testimony from healthcare workers who felt like they were wronged because there's not an enhanced penalty for them like there are for law enforcement. And so I think we're putting prosecutors in a very awkward situation when we're talking about, well, you have a family who's devastated, who wants more punishment. They want retribution for what happened. And maybe their child wasn't in a crosswalk and they weren't in a school zone. And now what that symbolizes or signals to those families is that their child isn't worth as much because they didn't die in the right place. And so I think we need to consider what this might be saying. So in my concerns, I mean, I don't know that I'd want to go down the road of a bill draft with this. Just let's figure out what the best route possible is before we have bill drafts done.
Thank you, Representative Provenza. Further discussion? Representative Washit?
So just to make sure I'm clear, this motion would not include a child who gets off of a school bus and a driver goes past the school bus with the red flashing lights outside of a school zone and is struck and killed. This would only apply in a school zone or in a crosswalk. And it would not include bicyclists who are riding lawfully adjacent to a roadway who are then struck. It only deals with school zones and crosswalks. Is that
Correct. If anyone wants to bring another motion for another bill draft dealing with some of those concerns, you can, but this is what the motion addresses right now. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
That motion has passed. Further discussion? Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. You know, we're talking about after the fact, after somebody's killed. I would like to, at our next meeting, have WAM or YDOT or whoever. I would like to see ways to prevent that death from occurring in the first place, as I related and the young lady back there related, you know. Yeah, it's a horrible tragedy after somebody's killed. Is there a way to make it so people are more aware of that crosswalk? And so possibly we prevent a unnecessary death. So I'd like to get more information at our next meeting on things that maybe, you know, the cities are doing or YDOT's doing or things that I'd rather prevent it than talk about this person's dead now. Are we going to send them to prison for 1 year, 5 years? What are we going to do? But I'd like to prevent it before it happens. So that's just a comment.
Thank you, Senator French, and I think a good segue into the next kind of goal maybe of this topic. I think that direction is great. So for our next meeting is to have YDOT, WAM, county commissioners here, anyone else relevant to crosswalk safety, to come share with us steps that have been taken or could be taken to make these areas safer. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. On that note, I'd like to ask for a memo or maybe motion for a memo that talks about what other states might do in terms of maintaining or ensuring that those crosswalks continue to be apparent. Because I think we heard about paint issues or other identifying things. So how far away does the warning, is the warning placed for a crosswalk? How do we ensure that that crosswalk is clear and visible? And yeah, so forth. So I'd like to see how we can maybe better handle that.
I am going to guess, Representative Provenza, that our subject matter experts that will be here at our next meeting, YDOT particularly, with the direction to provide kind of that to that level of education for the committee. So I would say let's delegate that to YDOT. You, Mr. Hopkinson?
Madam Chairman, they are the ones that are responsible for promulgating those rules that establish all of that sort of thing. So that they would be the ones I think best situated to answer those questions.
Wonderful. All right, any further discussion on this topic? All right, seeing none, this topic is closed. Okay, with that, let's go to Supreme Court opinions. Mr. Fuller, if you're ready, do you want to start us off with Archer v.
Yep.
Mills?
Actually, I'm going to turn this to Mr. Hopkinson, but just before we get started, just two quick prefatory comments. This is, I believe, the 4th or 5th year the committee has looked at Wyoming Supreme Court opinions where the court has interpreted statutes and has considered the legislature's intent in enacting statutes and deciding those cases and issues. Each of the 6 summaries for the cases that were selected include general considerations for the committee to consider. Those considerations should be considered, by no means exhaustive or any sort of endorsement on our part for the committee to take action or any action on any of these cases that we described.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. And I would ask that you remind us of that regularly. Thank you. Mr. Hopkinson, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I'm just going to walk through the May 3rd memo with respect to the Archer v. Callista Mills case. Topic summary there is wrongful death intervener. Wyoming's wrongful death statute finds its roots in the territorial laws from 1871. It's been around for quite some time. Under the common law, an individual who had suffered pecuniary or other harm from the death of another had no cause of action against the person who had caused that death. That was remedied in England in 1846 by a statute commonly known as Lord Campbell's Act that did essentially allow certain near relatives who had suffered pecuniary loss from the death of a person to have a cause of action against the person who had caused that death. Wyoming's wrongful death statute specifically provides that whenever the death of a person is caused by a wrongful act, neglect, or default, such as would have entitled the party injured to maintain an action to recover damages if death had not ensued, the person who would have been liable if death had not ensued is liable in an action for damages, even though the death was caused under circumstances as amount in law to murder in the first or second degree or manslaughter. If the person liable dies, the action may be brought against the executor or administrator of his estate, and if he left no estate within the state of Wyoming, the court may appoint an administrator upon application. So essentially, that wrongful death statute does allow or provide for an individual to sue someone who has caused that wrongful death. In order to initiate a wrongful death action in Wyoming, a person must first initiate an action to be appointed as the wrongful death representative. There are no statutory limitations on who can be appointed that wrongful death representative, but the courts are required to appoint the person who will best represent the interests of any potential beneficiaries of the action as a whole. The court will consider such factors as family relationship, the interests of the proposed representative in relation to other beneficiaries, the actions that person has taken to secure appointment, and any other factors that they deem relevant. Any person who may qualify as a wrongful death representative may intervene in the action to appoint the wrongful death representative as a matter of right. A person who has been appointed as a wrongful death representative is then required to provide notice in newspaper of general circulation. They have to file within 60 days a report that lists all reasonably ascertainable potential beneficiaries and the efforts that they have made to notify them of their appointment as the wrongful death representative. And the appointment of the wrongful death representatives is intended to be simply a procedural device for that person to then investigate the wrongful death and potentially bring a wrongful death action. Following their appointment as the wrongful death representative, that person may then bring that wrongful death action, and it shall be brought in the name of the wrongful death representative for the exclusive benefit of the beneficiaries who have sustained damage. And that wrongful death representative acts as a trustee of those on behalf of those beneficiaries. In this particular case, in Archer v. Callista Mills, Carrie Lynn died several days after undergoing elective surgery. Her niece, Callista Mills, was appointed as her wrongful death representative pursuant to Wyoming statute. She then later brought a wrongful death action against Charles Lynn, who was Carrie Lynn's husband, alleging that he had negligently caused her death. Approximately a year following, Mills signed a document releasing Charles from all causes of action inserted in that wrongful death action, and she filed a stipulated motion to dismiss the wrongful death action with prejudice. Two of the potential beneficiaries then filed or moved to intervene in the wrongful death action itself. The district court held a hearing on those various pending motions and required those interveners, Archer and Farley, Lacey Archer and Emily Farley, to provide proper service, which they had not done. And the court then dismissed the wrongful action with prejudice when they failed to do so. The question on appeal before the court was whether or not a person who is not the wrongful death representative could intervene in the wrongful death action itself. Ultimately, the court determined that Wyoming statute requires that every wrongful death action be in the name of that wrongful death representative, that the only person who can bring a wrongful death action is the person who is the representative. So the proper place for an action to have been brought was in the appointment action, not in the wrongful death action itself. The court found that the action was properly dismissed and that while Archer and Farley could have intervened in that wrongful death appointment action rather than the wrongful death action itself, that action was not before the court, so they did not make any determinations as far as that goes. Some potential committee considerations would be whether someone other than the representative could bring a wrongful death action and who that might be, whether the prohibition on appealing from an order appointing a wrongful death representative remains appropriate in light of this case. To go into that in a little more detail, Wyoming statute provides that there's no appeal from an order appointing a wrongful death representative, but the court may entertain motions to reconsider who the wrongful death representative is. Additional considerations might be whether additional statutory changes are necessary to ensure that a wrongful death representative is acting in the best interests of all potential beneficiaries, and whether additional requirements or terms should be instituted in determining who will be appointed as a wrongful death representative. With that, I would stand for any questions on this particular memorandum.
Mr. Hopkinson, thank you so much. I have Senator Kolb going to retrieve Co-Chairman Olson because he is the one that wanted this case up for the committee's consideration. It is actually not a bill draft that, or a topic, a case that I thought was probably a good idea for this committee because it's pretty complicated technically. Not that we can't master it, but it is a challenge. Representative Zwanitzer.
A question then. So is the issue at hand because the judge has sole power at the beginning to appoint someone as a representative and then that's just not appealable? And that does strike me as odd that perhaps the judge, and I know we have one here, would do fact finding and select someone, but as details emerge, does a law allow a judge to reverse their decision and pick a different representative in the course of events? It does seem interesting that upfront, after someone's passed away, the judge makes a decision and you're stuck with it. Do other states do the same thing? Maybe that's my question. Is this pretty common law practice, or we just don't have robust enough statutes to cover what other states do?
Mr. Hopkinson, if you can.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Zwanitzer, I have not looked into what other states do in this area, but I'd be happy to provide that information. The way the statute reads right now is that there is no appeal, but it does leave the opportunity open for the court to consider a motion to reconsider that representative. So down the road, someone could potentially intervene in that action and the judge could reconsider his appointment of who the wrongful death representative was.
Further questions? Clear understanding of what's going on in the case, committee? It's complicated as a practicing lawyer as well, so it's a bear. Co-Chairman Olson, your thoughts?
I just thought no better committee to take on the challenge, especially with you as the co-chairman now. No, I think it's definitely my interest was sparked in it, not having known what other states do or don't do. I think if the committee has any interest in the challenge, that would be the first place that I would look, is to see what the process looks like in other states, bearing in mind the difference between states that operate under a uniform probate code versus a more
customized code that we have in Wyoming. All of those nuances play into it. So I don't have any starting places in my mind.
Great. Okay,
And I really don't care, honestly. I'm not that interested. I thought it would be an interesting case to look at, but if there's not an interest in it, it's not a
French?
hill I'm gonna die on.
Just curious, how often does this happen? That we're, possibly want to change the statute or something? Does this happen often that that appointed representative, somebody says, oh, no, they're appoint me? I mean, does this happen very often?
yes, Senator French, I think, so this is a case, this has nothing to do with the probate action. This has to do with someone has died, a wrongful death action, right? Someone has died. And so a family member or other statutorily identified individual comes forward to sue as a plaintiff for the wrongful death of that individual. And so let's imagine that it's a family, right? And a child dies, and the parents are divorced. And so should the biological dad bring it or the biological mom bring the wrongful death action on behalf of the child, of which they both would be beneficiaries? And so one of them needs to come forward and provide a petition to ask the court to be identified as the personal representative, to get kind of statutory authority to have the standing to move forward to pursue the wrongful death case, which may be filed at a different time and is in a different action than who was actually appointed as the personal representative for the wrongful death action. And so in the petition to identify who that representative may be, that's the first opportunity for potential representatives to dispute who that should be with the court before the court authorizes who that personal representative may be. I think some of the challenges are that courts are quick to grant that authorization, recognizing the need to move forward with that concern. And so there's no, I don't believe, a requirement for a hearing in that petition. Mr. Hopkinson, is that correct?
Madam Chairman, I don't know that there's spelled out that they have to hold a hearing, but just the factors of what they have to consider when they do that. I would think if there's a dispute, it might be common practice to hold a hearing, but I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, so there's always a race kind of to the courthouse for who is going to pursue the case. And so different lawyers are also excited about that, who might be representing different potential beneficiaries for who would be in charge of taking what might be a very valuable wrongful death case forward. And so whoever their client may be, so oftentimes there's disputes about that. And that's sometimes why disputes can occur as well. And I don't believe there is a requirement for a hearing. So one thing would be is to require a hearing to occur, because oftentimes whoever just files first, the court authorizes it without further consideration. So that's one option, I think, to consider. And then the option to challenge, and I think Mr. Hopkinson identified that there's an ability to reconsider the appointment. Is that in statute?
Madam Chairman, I do believe that is, it is in subsection C of 138-104C. It does provide the court, however, may entertain a motion to reconsider an appointment of a wrongful death representative. So it is permissive, but that is in statute.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hopkinson. Representative Washit?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I missing something here? But it seemed to me when I read through this case that one, there was an opportunity to seek a motion to reconsider. And then number two, that the parties were given an opportunity to execute service within 10 days by the court and failed to do so. So it seems to me that the system that we have in place could have already addressed the needs of these parties who felt like they were left out of this process, but they failed to avail themselves of the opportunities that already exist. So in my reading of it, it looked like the system is fine, that just the parties in this case miss some opportunities.
All right, committee, is any other questions or desire to take action on this topic? All right, seeing none, we're gonna go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break. The room is restless and we're not focused, and we're gonna get refocused by taking a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 11:30. All right, welcome back from the break, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with an important case, Hassler versus Circle C Resources. Mr. Hopkinson, if you could please give us an overview of that case. Everyone refocused? Yep. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This case has to do with non-compete agreements and how the court kind of deals with those. Non-compete agreements was something this committee took up last year, did some work on that. So I'll kind of won't go into what those are unless requested, but just generally for the committee, the contracts, which non-compete agreements are generally void if they're in violation of public policy. However, courts have found that unreasonable restriction on trade in those non-compete agreements, when they're reviewing what those unreasonable restrictions are, they have taken three approaches. One is the all or nothing rule, which essentially is they void a restrictive covenant, even if part of it is enforceable, doesn't matter, the whole thing is void. Two, they might take the blue pencil approach, which allows the court to enforce reasonable terms and excise or just cut out the unreasonable terms. And then that third approach is the partial enforcement or the liberal blue pencil approach, which allows the court to reform and enforce restrictive covenants unless there are indications of bad faith or overreaching by the employer. In 1993, in the case Hopper v. Alpet Animal Clinic, the Wyoming Supreme Court did adopt the partial enforcement approach, which again would just simply allow the court to modify unreasonable terms in non-compete agreements. In the case that we're reviewing today, Hassler v. Circle C Resources, the court revisited that liberal blue pencil approach. In Hassler, Circle C is a company that provides both day and residential habilitation services to disabled clients in Natrona and Converse counties. It hired Charlene Hassler, a CNA, on March 17th, 2015 to provide residential services to one of its clients. At the time, Ms. Hassler signed a confidentiality and a non-compete agreement, which prohibited Ms. Hassler from engaging in any competing business or service otherwise provided by Circle C during her employment for them and for up to 2 years following the end of her employment. It further prohibited her from soliciting any of Circle C's clients for that same time period. The agreement prohibited any competition in an area where Circle C marketed, which included Natrona, Converse, Fremont, Weston, Laramie, Johnson, and Campbell counties. After approximately a month of training, Ms. Hassler began providing services for one client of Circle C's in her home. Subsequently, the client's mother became dissatisfied with the day services provided by Circle C and sought another provider. Later on, a couple of years later, their client's case manager notified Circle C that the client was changing providers and that Ms. Hassler was going to be leaving Circle C's employ. She, however, did continue to provide residential habilitation services to that client and was paid significantly more by the new Medicaid provider. Circle C filed a complaint against Ms. Hassler in July 2019 for breach of the non-compete agreement. The district court ultimately ruled in favor of Circle C, finding that the non-compete was reasonable if certain modifications were in place. And using the liberal blue pencil rule, the court modified the geographical limitations to include only Natrona and Converse, and it reduced the time limitations from 24 months down to 12 months. It found that the contract was then violated and granted judgment in favor of Circle C for approximately $94,000. Ms. Hassler appealed that decision to the Wyoming Supreme Court, who then took that opportunity to review the court's use of the liberal blue pencil rule. And it ultimately decided or considered several factors that since adopting the liberal blue pencil rule in Hopper, it hadn't used or affirmed the use of the blue pencil rule. Considered that the blue pencil rule strays from the typical rules of contract interpretation and enforcement. Considered that in practice, the rule places an unfair burden on employees and creates uncertainty in business relationships. It considered that the blue pencil rule tips the scales even further towards employers by allowing them to draft overbroad employment agreements and incentivizes them to do so because they could rely on the courts to modify on its own unreasonable terms in those non-compete agreements. And it provided that if challenged, again, that an overly broad agreement might dissuade employees from seeking better business opportunities with the risk that they would be held to that non-compete agreement. The court then determined that it's not the role of the courts to redraft non-compete agreements to bring them within the bounds of reason, and overruled the Hopper case, and ultimately found that that non-compete agreement in this case was unreasonable on its face and thus void in violation of public policy, and reversed the decision of the district court. Some potential committee considerations then, or if the committee wishes to reconsider its work on non-compete agreements from last year in light of this change from allowing the use of the liberal blue pencil rule. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions from the committee? Committee, do you agree with the court that they found the covenant not to compete prohibiting a CNA from continuing to be a CNA in her community was in violation of public policy? Do you want to codify that? How do you want to do that? So recognizing that this has been an issue presented before the committee for the last few years, it appears to be, as we've discussed before, that there's one or two covenant not to compete bills or cases that find them way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is having to rule on them. We heard from Representative Stiff last year throughout the interim, also related to a healthcare related case. This one is as well. So just for your consideration, is there any public comment on this bill? I know that there is profound interest on this topic. Trial lawyers, comments, anything? No? All right. Okay, public comments closed. Representative Washit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year when we were talking about this issue, I remember us talking about disparity of power, and that, CEOs and hospitals and medical doctors and different folks have more clout when it comes to negotiating these types of agreements than do $12 an hour CNAs, right? And when we suggested that there be some type of classification system between management or upper management and professional employees and more blue collar or less well paid. If I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Representative Stiff told us he thought that might actually increase the amount of litigation over whether or not this scale of employee would be in or out. But I still think that there's some merit to that approach, that low-level employees aren't going to be able to go out and hire an attorney to assist them and help them review the draft of the contract. They want the job. They're just going to sign it, just like taking the user agreement on software you download because you want the software. So I just think that if we go forward and we're looking at how we might want to codify this, I think that some type of employment level test would be appropriate.
Further discussion, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As I recall, and during the last discussion, there was a big back and forth with physicians in that level of professionals. And I think that was pretty clear that the hospital association, I believe at that point, and I'm sure they can speak to it later, found a lot of issues with bringing that group in for non-compete clauses because of the level of their sophistication. And typically they're represented by their own attorneys And, you know, they go forward with a lot more information, I think, for a contractual agreement than a CNA, let's say, or a welder. So I still do have an interest in this, and it seems like, and I wish to hear the attorney's comment that we have, that this seems to be an opening for us to delve into this if the committee wants to, but I'm interested. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. Excuse me. Further discussion? Seeing none. Committee, do you want to take any action? No action is taken. Committee, I'm going to need you to participate. There's a lot of distraction going on right now. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Sorry for the sleeping at the button. I would move for a bill draft to bring back the non-compete agreement bill that we had in the past. We can, I don't know if I want to reference Senator Representative Stitt's bill to work on a redraft to make it amenable to this committee, obviously through the process.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Larson. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I know. And I appreciate the participation. All right. With that, committee, let's go on to Rosen v. State.
Okay, Madam Chairman, committee members, Rosen versus State, the question that this case presents is whether a juvenile court can exercise jurisdiction over a person who committed an offense when that person was 17, but was not charged with the offense until he turned 18. So that's just by way of kind of the bottom line question this case presents. This case involves the Juvenile Justice Act. And among other things, you know, the act is what was enacted to remove, where appropriate, the taint of criminality from children committing certain unlawful acts. This act provides, the Juvenile Justice Act provides jurisdiction. So the authority for when the juvenile court, which is created by statute, can act in certain cases involving juveniles. Generally, the legislature conferred general jurisdiction to the juvenile court in all matters and proceedings that are commenced therein, or that the district court is transferred concerning, among other things, any minor who is alleged to be delinquent under the Juvenile Justice Act. That's 58102 A1. The next paragraph says that the juvenile court has general jurisdiction concerning any minor alleged to have committed a delinquent act before attaining the age of majority. So there is a specific reference in that statute, and that paragraph alone in 58102, and these are on page 2 of the memo. That is the only place that specifically references the age of a person rather than the type of action that would be brought. For delinquency issues, the juvenile court has concurrent jurisdiction in all cases except for status offenses in which a minor is alleged to have committed an offense that otherwise would be a crime. And this is 14.6.203C. This is on page 3 of the memo, and that language is reproduced in its entirety toward the top of the page. Then all cases for which the juvenile court has concurrent jurisdiction, meaning that the juvenile court, a particular case can be brought in either the juvenile court or the district court. All of those cases shall originally be commenced in the juvenile court, but may be transferred to another court. And then certain types of cases may be originally commenced in either the juvenile court or the district court. And that list is the list of bullet points on page 3. Included among those are felony cases in which the minor has attained the age of 17. And in those situations, like a prosecutor must consider statutory factors before commencing an action in district court. So in this case, an individual, while he was 17, touched a friend in a sexually inappropriate manner and prevented her from leaving when she tried to. Law enforcement, so this happened while the person was 17, while the offender was 17. Law enforcement learned of this incident more than a year later. And then after doing so, they charged this person who at this point was 18 with a felony and misdemeanor offense related to the incident. The defendant moved to transfer his case from district court, where it was initially charged, to juvenile court. The state objected. They argued that the transfer was improper because the juvenile court could only exercise jurisdiction in a criminal case brought against a minor, and the defendant was not a minor when he was charged. The district court agreed with the state and concluded that when reading two provisions in the Juvenile Justice Act, two that I've previously mentioned, that are on page 3, and then the third bullet point on page 3 as well, that the Juvenile Justice Act applies only to cases that involve a minor or a child. And those provisions that describe the grant of jurisdiction relating to a minor or a child only apply so long as the person charged is a minor or a child at the time of being charged. And if the person charged is not a minor at that time, then the juvenile court lacked jurisdiction. So that was the district court's holding. The Supreme Court reversed, and the court held that the juvenile court's concurrent jurisdiction depends on the offender's age at the time the offender committed an offense, not the offender's age at the time he was charged. And the court noted first that Wyoming statute 14.6.203C, this is the one on the top of page 3, was ambiguous and could be read one of two ways. It could be read to describe the case itself, so the case brought against a person who is a minor, or to describe the person, i.e. when the person is alleged to have committed the offense or when being charged. So in light of that ambiguity, the court resorted to rules of statutory construction, one of which is to look at other sections and read them in tandem with this applicable section. And the court looked particularly at 58102A2. This is on page 2 of the memo. The court noted that this refers to what a minor has done before attaining the age of majority. And that language would be unnecessary if the person was required to be a minor when charged. And this to the court provided clear guidance for interpreting 14.6.203C. And in doing so, the court concluded that, quote, the legislature intended the court's concurrent jurisdiction to include jurisdiction over matters involving an offender who has reached the age of majority, but is alleged to have committed a criminal offense as a child, end quote. The court also noted that in other places in the Juvenile Justice Act, a juvenile court's orders can remain in effect until the person turns 21. And implicit in that is the authority that the legislature recognized and intended that the Juvenile Justice Act may apply beyond the age of majority. The court also noted that the legislature has been clear and explicit when it has intended to limit the juvenile court's jurisdiction. So for example, in the neglect statutes, the legislature has stated that the juvenile court's orders for a child adjudicated as neglected terminate on the child's 18th birthday. The court also noted that its holding was consistent with the Juvenile Justice Act's purpose to, among other things, remove the taint of criminality when appropriate. And the opposite holding would undermine those goals and the uniformity and consistency in that you would have different results and for persons who committed offenses at 17, but were charged at different times. So a person charged at 17 versus a person charged at 18, may have different results. With that, there's another quote as well from the court that's on page 7 of the memo, where it noted that it is apparent that the legislature understood and intended that a juvenile court's jurisdiction would extend to child offenders who have attained the age of majority, and that the legislature could have more clearly defined the reach of that jurisdiction. But in the absence of such clarity, the court resorted to rules of statutory interpretation to find that given the discernible legislative intent, The court could not interpret the use of the word child throughout the act to be jurisdictional. So the questions that the committee may wish to consider in light of this case would be whether 14.6.203C needs clarification in terms of the juvenile court's concurrent jurisdiction over persons who commit offenses as children but are not charged until after age 18. And if so, what other changes may be necessary in light of that? And in doing so, I would note the quoted language from the opinion on the bottom of page 7 going on to page 8 of the memo, which the court noted what other states have done to make clear that a juvenile court's jurisdiction may extend beyond age 18 if the offense was committed as a minor. With that, Madam Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Mr. Fuller, thank you. Questions for Mr. Fuller? Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Particularly, what would be the benefit of charging somebody as an adult when they committed a crime as a juvenile? I mean, I don't see what it is, and I'm asking you with legal opinion is why would that be of a benefit, say, to the state seeking justice in that circumstance of what we're talking about currently? Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Representative Craigo, Representative Oakley. I think in this case, it might have to do with the sex offender registry. That's just me. Juvenile court can, yes, when someone is determined to be delinquent in the juvenile court, county attorneys, anytime you want to join in here, there's no criminal history. It's potentially, it can be erased. If someone is charged as an adult, then they have a felony conviction associated with that crime. So it's a big deal. And so if you want to, depending on the conduct associated with the crime, prosecutors sometimes can decide whether or not to charge the individual as a juvenile or whether or not to charge them as an adult for the types of resources that are available in the juvenile court as opposed to the punishments that are available in the district court for an adult, if that makes sense. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and just reading from the opinion, cases under the Juvenile Justice Act are not criminal, they're special proceedings. These proceedings are therefore equitable and not punitive. There's a very significant difference if you're holding somebody, and again, especially these big crimes, for a significant crime that would be on their permanent record and punished as such.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I think one thing that take into consideration is that the point of having a juvenile court and different sentencing guidelines for juveniles is in part because when they commit the crime and they're a juvenile, they don't have the same executive functioning. They don't have the same level of culpability. And so just because someone aged in the statute, and we have statute of limitations that allowed for that and can still be investigated, who they are at 22 or whatever, it's potentially not the same person that committed that act.
Representative Washut and then Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that DFS or someone will be testifying here shortly to address this, but I think that the issue for me is maybe Mr. Fuller knows, is there an upper end? Because we don't have statute of limitations. So if somebody who's 22 or 25 is charged with a sexual molestation of a child or something when they were 17, are we now going to have the possibility of a 25-year-old being sent to Worland and incarcerated with a group of juveniles? And what are the complications of that? And even if it's younger, if we now have a legal adult, an 18-year-old, have we limited the range of options for the court? Or can we put an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old into some of our juvenile facilities?
Mr. Fuller, isn't it true that we do have juveniles up to the age of 21 in some of those facilities, Mr. Fuller?
Madam Chairman, Representative Washut, not 100% sure on that particular question.
Yeah.
Certainly with Wyoming law, your question, I believe, is an open one. There is a distinction in that footnote that the court, or not that, but the language that I quoted in the memo from the opinion, there is some difference in how states have treated this. So some states just say that, the juvenile court can have jurisdiction over a person for an offense committed while the person was a minor, regardless of the offender's age when being charged. Montana, I believe, extends the juvenile court's jurisdiction to age 21 for persons who committed a delinquent act before age 18.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Does this apply to all criminal acts that took place before the age of majority, before 18, or only to sexual offenses? Question one, because everything's all guided towards sexual offenses because of the nature of this particular case. It goes back to, in my mind, is if you were a juvenile when you committed some crime, then you were a juvenile mental capacity at that time. And because it took the state or whatever set of circumstances 3 years to catch up to you, it didn't make you an adult while you committed said crime. And that was why I was asking the question about the reasons why you would want to charge somebody as an adult while they committed a crime as a juvenile. Just retribution, is that what we're after? A pound of flesh? That was my question. Thank you.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I do want to say, just for clarification, from Representative Provenza's point, all of this does at least center around somewhat that we pay attention to a juvenile's abilities and their mental state. That being said, there is still discretion to charge juveniles as an adult. We say that it's kind of, but which is done on crimes. And then there's a whole, which is included in here, but then we can do a transfer hearing. So if we have the discretion, we can charge them as an adult, so criminally. We currently have, in Fremont, we currently have some minors charged with first-degree murder. And then there's a transfer hearing where those elements are taken into account, the factors. But I just want that understood, that there is this process. It's not a dispositive. It's like, it's not just 18, or younger or above. There's still decisions that are made, whether they're held as an adult, that relates to their offense. So, we do hold teenagers on some serious, probably sex offenses, violent charges, where we charge them as an adult.
Representative Craigo, further comments or the scope of offenses that can be considered?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Actually, I was just going to say exactly what Representative Oakley said, is that I think we're getting a little off topic with some of the conversation. Really what we're talking about is whether or not the courts have the ability to hear a juvenile case when someone has reached the age of majority. When they've turned 18, can we still hear their case? Do they have the ability, the statutory ability, to hear that case in juvenile court? That's really all we're talking about. We're not talking about discretion of whether or not the prosecutors can bring the case in adult court or juvenile court or anything like that. We're just talking about, does our local court system, do our district court judges have the ability to then transfer that case? If it's brought in adult court, can they transfer that case to juvenile once that person's reached 18? And the Supreme Court said they can. The question is, do we want to codify that and make it very clear so that we don't have that question going forward?
Right, that's right, Representative Craigo. Mr. Fuller, if you could read part of the court's opinion where they identified some of the statutory ambiguity, kind of that signaling, if you could.
Yep, and Madam Chairman, I'll just refer to the memo. I pulled out a couple of block quotes that may be helpful. The first would be on page 5. The court first said that 14.6203C was ambiguous, and that you could interpret it 2 different ways. From there, the court went to 58102A2, and the court noted specifically the language regarding before attaining the age of majority. And that language would be unnecessary, the court reasoned, if you had to be a minor while being charged. The real quote I would point out for the committee, it's on page 7 of the memo. And this is where the court directly references the legislature and its actions. So the court noted it's apparent that the legislature understood and intended that a juvenile court's jurisdiction would extend to child offenders who have attained the age of majority. The legislature could have more clearly defined the reach of that jurisdiction. But in the absence of that clarity, the court in this case interpreted the act's terms in a manner consistent with the legislature's intent, and concluded that they could not interpret the word child to be jurisdictional, meaning that the court would interpret child to reference the time the offense was committed, to where a case involving a minor who committed a delinquent act before 18 but was charged after 18 could have his or her case heard in juvenile court.
Committee members, vote, say aye if you agree with the Supreme Court's opinion. All those in favor of the Supreme Court's opinion, vote aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no.
No.
All right, sounds like you want to make some laws. All right, Representatives Monitor.
Are you ready for a motion?
I am.
Then I would move that basically we codify the Supreme Court's opinion, which says the legislature obviously set it up right, but if we need to clarify that in line with the Wyoming Supreme Court's opinion, I would ask for a bill draft codifying their brilliant opinion of how things should work.
Representative Craigo, do you have thoughts on how to more specifically do that? You're seconding, so let's take a look so that LSO has some clear direction in light of this piece. So let me get back to where we were. So if you go to page 5 of the memo, that can be very helpful. And we're looking at statute 14.6.203 subsection C. If you just want to read that first paragraph there and give you a chance to get your arms around that. So Representative Swanitzer, do you want to make it do you want to have a bill draft that addresses statute 14.6.203 subsection C? And if so, what would that be?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I do. So that would be the statute in question, and it's great having two attorneys on both sides of me as we're discussing all of the intricacies. And so at this point, I'm not sure how I want it to read, but we probably should bring that statute up, and if LSO would give us a policy choice of which way.
So I think Representative Swanitzer, that if to be consistent with the committee's wishes, that we need to amend 14.6.203 to provide additional language that includes that a case can be brought against a person who was a minor at the time that the crime was committed or the offense was committed. Mr. Fuller, are you clear with that? All right, Representative Craigo seconded. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. Further discussion on this case? Representative Washit.
Just a question on process. Are we going to receive some public comment on this case either now or in September?
Would you like to receive public comment, Representative Washit? Do you want to hear from the Director of DFS? You have a question about that?
I would. I think without an upper age limit, as Mr. Fuller mentioned, that we're given the juvenile court authority with this change in legislation for, you know, a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old who committed a crime when he was 17, but we don't catch him or identify the crime until many years later. Seems to me we got to have an upper limit on there someplace. And I just wonder what exactly, we put juveniles into the juvenile system to provide services for them. And I just want to know, can we provide services well when we have mature people inside the juvenile system? And does other statutes perhaps cap that at 21, or do we need to put an age of 21 into this proposed bill draft that for acts committed when a person was a minor, but charged before that individual reaches age 21? I think that would make more sense.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we do have statutes that say that someone cannot receive juvenile services or enter into these different forms of punishment, I guess, after they're 21. So once they turn 21, it's not available to them anymore, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Director Schmidt, if you could come forward, please. We'll go ahead and take public comment right now. Is there anyone else that can provide, probably you have no interest in providing public comment, but if you can provide any kind of insight, that might be helpful. Is there anyone in the room that could or would? Specifically related to juvenile court jurisdiction. Okay. Director Schmidt, thank you for being here, and thanks for coming up and talking on probably something you weren't anticipated, but if you can address some of these questions that might have been discussed, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Chairwoman Nethercott, members of the committee. I'm Corin Schmidt. I'm the Director of the Department of Family Services. The juvenile court has jurisdiction until until the age of 21. So that means then the juvenile court and all of those things available under juvenile court would continue till they're 21. I think one of the policy questions is if you have a person who committed a crime as a minor but wasn't charged, then what is it that you want to happen to that now adult? Because the boys' school and the girls' school is only available to 21. However, if the charge is at age 20 and there's a decision to be placed at the boys' school or the girls' school, that's only for 1 year. And does that sentencing then really measure what it is that you think is an appropriate penalty for the crime? So I think that age of 21 is something to consider, but the juvenile court doesn't have jurisdiction over 21.
Great, thank you. All right, further public comment? And if you want to just stay close, Director, I have a feeling there'll be some more questions. Come on forward. And Representative Krego, while she is, why don't you make your comment?
Madam Chairman, I just had a quick question for the director. What statute is it that provides that 21 is the upper age limit for jurisdiction of the juvenile court?
Or maybe LSO can provide that. It is 21. All right, we'll hear from that. Here, please introduce yourself. Is your mic on?
Oh,
There
now
we
it
go.
is. My
Welcome.
apologies.
Welcome, thank you.
I also didn't bring my glasses. Cheryl Foland, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Merlins, Wyoming. And I work directly with the juvenile court services. And I was wanting to comment basically on the question was asked about services. One of the challenges we have with those adults that are charged then under the juvenile side is who pays for the services. If they're not committed to the boys and girls schools, then community services are at the forefront. And under the Family First Act, the priority is to keep obviously services in the community. One of those challenges is that there is a difference in the brain and how the juvenile is treated. And I work specifically with juvenile sex offenders, and I also work with adult sex offenders. And there is a difference in the programming. There is a difference in the treatment. And those things have to be considered. At 21, I don't have the luxury of DFS paying for those services. And those services may not be provided if there's not appropriate insurance, or the family has the means to cover those services, or the offender themselves has those means to cover. So I hope that helps clarify some of the question on treatment services and the brain.
All right, thank you. back on the focus of this bill draft, which is juvenile court providing statutory clarification over the question of concurrent jurisdiction for minors. Any additional questions for the director or any other public comment that you were seeking? Representative Washit?
Thank you. Just briefly, could you describe what DFS presently provides in terms of services for a 20-year-old offender? Do you place them in the boys' school, the girls' school? Do you have facilities for adults in those facilities? Who pays? And what can you really do for a adult offender who gets processed through the juvenile system simply because of the age they were at the time the crime was committed?
Director?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Washit, that's a good question, and I am not familiar of a case where a 20-year-old was sentenced to the boys' school under a juvenile court proceeding. We do have 20-year-olds at the boys' school who were there that have been continued on a stay. So we do have older youth, adults in the boys' school. That is a complication for us because then we, as you all know, we have 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds as well. So it's a little bit of a muddy area, and I can respect the committee's struggle with this. Yes, the crime was committed as a delinquent under the age, but then what do you do with an adult at that point? Services that would be available would be whatever the court ordered us to provide. So that could be probation. We could do supervised probation. We could do a placement. We have a lot of problems with kids that are older that can't go to residential treatment centers or psychiatric residential treatment facilities because they're age limited oftentimes. So in that 18 to 20-year-old area, there's a lot of gray. Education laws come into place and what they can provide. It's a tricky population. We see it more often with not just a pretty clear cut of a violation of law, but where we have youth with a lot of high needs that maybe have committed a crime, that are potentially developmentally disabled, mentally ill, and then happen to be older. And that's where it gets real complicated.
Thank you, Director. Additional discussion? Representative Craigo?
Madam Chairman, I would love to hear from Mr. Fuller and what he in the statute.
My apologies, Mr.
Yep.
Fuller.
Madam Chairman, Representative Craigo, 14.6.231C. And that reads, unless sooner terminated by court order, all orders issued under this act shall terminate with respect to a child adjudicated delinquent when he reaches 21 years of age.
With that, committee, we're going to go ahead and close this topic out. There is a bill draft, so there's an opportunity to provide additional comment on this topic at our September meeting, but in light of the time, we'll go ahead and move forward. All right, with that, we'll go to case in Ray RH versus state.
Yep. And Madam Chairman, members of the committee, this case, the question presented in this case is whether Wyoming statute 14.6.241, and this is also in the Juvenile Justice Act, it concerns the expungement of juvenile records. Whether that statute allows the expungement of a juvenile record where a delinquency petition that alleged a violent felony, as that term's defined in the criminal code, could expunge that record where you have a petition alleging a violent felony, but the petition was ultimately dismissed. And so 14.6.241A provides that any person who has been adjudicated delinquent as a result of having committed a delinquent act other than a violent felony, so there's a pretty explicit exception in subsection A, may petition the juvenile court for expungement of the record after reaching 18. And that is on page, that subsection in its entirety is on page 2 of the accompanying memo. To have a record expunged, a person must have been adjudicated under subsection A person must have been adjudicated delinquent, not have been adjudicated delinquent for an act that satisfies the definition of violent felony in statute. So there's two requirements for expungement under that section. And if you do get expungement, those proceedings are deemed to have never occurred, and the petitioner can reply accordingly upon any inquiry in the matter. In 2019, this committee sponsored a bill to amend 14.6.241 to provide a process by which a person could seek expungement of juvenile court records when the person had not been adjudicated delinquent. And there's two subsections that are at issue here. Both of those are on page 3 of the memo, 14.6.241D and E. So subsection D provides for expungement, the possibility of expungement of a record of a minor admitted to a diversion program or granted a deferral. And those records may be expunged in the same manner and subject to the same limitations as provided in subsection A. Similarly, in subsection E, this subsection deals with a record of arrest, charges, or disposition resulting in dismissal, declined prosecution, or otherwise not resulting in a conviction or a delinquency adjudication may be expunged, and then again, in the same manner and subject to the same limitations as provided in subsection A. So in this case, the appellant was subject to a delinquency petition when he was 16. He was charged with first-degree sexual assault of a minor. That offense is included in the definition of violent felony under 61104. The state agreed to defer the delinquency petition in lieu of probation for 1 year. The appellant successfully completed probation, and then pursuant to that agreement, the state moved to dismiss the delinquency petition. The juvenile court granted that motion and ordered the appellant's file closed and sealed. And then after turning 18, the appellant petitioned the juvenile court to have the record of proceedings expunged. In his petition, he asserted that he had reached 18. He had not been convicted of a felony and didn't have any pending proceedings, and he was fully rehabilitated, was attending school and about to start a new job. The state objected to that petition. The state argued that the appellant was statutorily ineligible to have the record expunged because he was initially charged with and granted a deferral for an offense constituting a violent felony. The juvenile court agreed with the state and denied the petition. The court interpreted 14.6.241A to also that limitation regarding a violent felony to also apply in 14.6.241D and E. And the juvenile court noted that the limitation showed that the legislature clearly intended to be eligible for expungement of juvenile records, only those petitioners who fall outside the limitations of subsection A. The appellant appealed and the Supreme Court reversed. And the court framed the question in the case as whether the violent felony language in 14.6.241A describes the category of records that may be expunged or is a limitation on expungement as that term is used in subsections D and E of that section. The court noted that the placement of the violent felony exclusion in subsection A, particularly toward the beginning, suggested that the legislature intended that the language would only serve to describe the category of records that may be expunged under that subsection. So in other words, the violent felony exception, the court interpreted it to only apply to A and not as a limitation that was provided in A for purposes of subsection D and E. The court instead noted that the reference to limitations in 14.6.241D and E is just a reference to the separately listed findings that a court must make when deciding upon a petition to expunge a juvenile record. The court noted that that interpretation was consistent with the need to interpret the statutes in favor of the child's welfare and consistent with the Juvenile Justice Act's purpose of, among other things, removing, where appropriate, the taint of criminality. Court also noted that disallowing the expungement of a juvenile record in a case where a juvenile was charged with a violent felony but is never adjudicated or convicted of that offense would not serve that objective for removing the taint of criminality. The court also noted a potential incongruity between those who are adjudicated delinquent compared to those who are charged but whose petition is dismissed or deferred. There was a separate concurrence One justice would have concluded that 14.6241A and D are ambiguous, but ultimately agreed with the court's conclusion that subsection D doesn't preclude an application for expungement for a person who was charged with a violent felony, but wasn't adjudicated delinquent because he completed a diversion program. The considerations, the possible considerations for the committee for this case would be whether legislative change is needed to better clarify the conditions under which a juvenile can seek expungement of a juvenile record. And really more specifically, whether the ability to seek expungement of a record involving a violent felony should differ between expungements for juveniles who completed a deferral or whose petition was dismissed and those who were adjudicated delinquent. With that, Madam Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Questions for Mr. Fuller? All right, seeing none. Any public comment on this case? Dr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I don't have any comments specific to this case, but just to inform the committee that since this was enacted in 2019, we've only received 2 expungement requests for the full expungement of everything that's in our jurisdiction or in our holdings. So I think it's an interesting number to consider.
And Director, when the court proceedings in a juvenile court are done, they're confidential. So why would an individual need to expunge that record? Do you know?
Madam Chairwoman, my recollection of the 2019 case or whatever the issue was, the underlying reason why this legislation was brought forward was because there was somewhere in the road where that information did come back up. I don't know if it was because the person was charged and then it was moved to juvenile court, but there was some sort of background check where it showed up. And I think it just then, and again, this has been a little while ago, our records, we would not ever divulge that information, but there's other places in that line where that information could have come forward.
Clerk Sutton, please come forward. And Ms. Chambers. Welcome, both of you. Appreciate you being here. Can you
Madam
provide more
Chairwoman.
clarity? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Clerk of District Court Teton County and Sutton, I'm not sure that I can clarify much, except I share the, it's always interesting to me when I hear about juvenile expungement, just for the very reason that we are obligated never to release juvenile records under any circumstance absent a court order or with the direct ability to release while the case is active to those parties active in the case. So it's always been an interesting question. I do know that the expungement process for our record has evolved and been clarified that we shred, it is gone. There is no opportunity for a case under any circumstance that a court that wants to open and have access. So that's what comes to mind for me is the shredding makes it unavailable, even though we don't release them, even when they're not shredded under any circumstance where lawfully, my understanding is would be criminally charged to do so.
I think that's work from this Joint Judiciary Committee. Ms. Chambers?
Yes, Kara Chambers, Division of Victim Services. I was present at all these hearings because DCI was involved with whether we had any interaction with juvenile records. The issue came up in relation to military service, and that somehow, I believe because they were, the former juvenile themselves were just being completely honest, were divulging some of these matters. It was brought by then State Court Administrator Lily Sharp to try to clear this, but that was the background behind how this was somehow coming up in their application for military service. And that was what was discussed in 2019.
All right, thank you, Ms. Chambers. Mr. Fuller, any recollection? We were there together.
Madam Chairman, I think that was the case. I don't recall how the situation came up in terms of that difference regarding a statute, the statute not specifying what happened in cases where a juvenile was not adjudicated delinquent. I think there was also more clarification in 241 regarding the duty to destroy those records once an order of expungement had been entered, except for, I think, a couple very narrow circumstances in terms of aggregate data for certain federal reporting requirements.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Representative Washit?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, on page 2 of the memo, the last underlined element says, upon entry of an order, the proceedings in a petitioner's case are deemed never to have occurred, and a petitioner may reply accordingly upon any inquiry in the matter. I think that's important in that if we just have a closed juvenile record, but if we've expunged it, then we've clearly stated in the statute that that offender can not check the box, if you will, on a job application or a military application. And so I think that's maybe why we have expungement proceedings, even though they're not very many, even though the record may not be ordinarily discoverable, we clearly stay in statute here that you don't have to check the box. So I think that it would be worthy of the committee to take this up and clarify the intent. And I think there's good reason for the violent offender adjudications to be identified separately from other offenses that are being considered for expungement.
Judge Condor, is it your recollection that in a federal pre-sentence investigation report that a juvenile history may be present?
I saw Representative Crago had his hand up, so I will defer to him if you would like first.
Buy you some time. Again, at the federal courts, in a federal case, with a federal pre-sentence investigation report, it's my recollection that some juvenile history can be present in those. Is that your recollection?
I will, Madam Chairwoman, I guess my response would be, I'm not sure how that information is in those documents, but I believe that is accurate. I believe that information is contained in numerous pre-sentence reports across the country. I'm unaware of how that happens. So I guess I could tell you that yes, in my 20 years as a prosecutor, I saw mentioned in pre-sentence reports reference to juvenile records. I don't know how that happens. I don't know where it came from. I assumed the probation office knew, and there's some statute permitting it, but beyond that, got me.
Thank you, Judge. Representative Crago?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just had a point of discussion, and I don't know if we're there yet. As I read the case, I'm not sure. I mean, I read the statute literally the way it's written, and I think the Supreme Court accurately interpreted that, or at least in my mind, and I'm just not sure how we're going to fix the statute once the Supreme Court's interpreted it the way they do. I just don't know what we can do to change that or fix it, or not even sure we can clarify it any more than it's already clarified, at least the way I read it. It's pretty straightforward, but.
Thoughts from LSO? Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I think ultimately it's a consideration for the committee. This was one of the cases identified by the chairman for review. The committee can take any action as a matter of policy as it sees fit, or no action. If the court or if the committee agrees with the court's interpretation, then really, no action would likely be necessary.
Representative Monitor? Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Just a question. So your 17-year-old kid, you've committed something that you know will be expunged, but it's a felony, but it hasn't been expunged yet. So when you apply for a job and they say, have you committed a felony? I guess my question is, what's the legal requirement? You at that point at 17, before it's been officially expunged, have to say, yes, you've committed a felony. on a job application. That probably will stay somewhere. If it's a violent felony, you don't get your voting rights back. They get automatically expunged at 18, or you have to petition, correct, to get all of your records expunged. And so it does seem like we're catching some 17, 18, 19-year-olds, so they're going through this process that they know they have a felony. They assume that it will be expunged, but it hasn't been yet. And in that weird period of time, it goes places and stays with them in a variety of means, I believe. And so do we need a statute to address that? Is my question.
So Representative Zwanitzer, you are talking about, I think, a 17-year-old who might have been convicted in adult court, as opposed to this particular scenario where you have a delinquency adjudication, which then the minor is not convicted of a felony. They have been adjudicated delinquent for an offense that could be considered a felony, which is the whole kind of purpose of juvenile court. So with that committee, all of our work on juvenile justice this last year, here we've had 2 Supreme Court cases relating to the juvenile court system to evaluate kind of how those statutes that we've created are interpreted. Any action on this particular case? Seeing none, committee, we are going to go ahead and break for lunch. Let's try to come back here at